The son of a millionaire isolated by disability and loneliness finds an unexpected friendship in a street girl. Unafraid of his limitations, she approaches him with simplicity and naturalness, making him feel accepted for the first time. Over time, the boy realizes that his limitations do not define who he is, thanks to the sincere friendship and the love she brought. If this beautiful story of resilience and love interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you're watching us. To be continued. The midday sun blazed over the Vasconcelos mansion, an imposing structure on Park Avenue, one of New York City's most exclusive neighborhoods. Surrounded by a high wall and protected by a state-of-the-art security system, the residence was known as a symbol of the family's financial power. Inside that urban palace, however, not all the money in the world could buy what Henry Vasconcelos, only 12 years old, most desired: the feeling of being a normal child. Henry sat in his wheelchair, watching other children playing in the park next to the mansion from his bedroom window. His deep, curious brown eyes followed the agile movements of those boys and girls who ran, jumped and played without restrictions. Unlike them, Henry had been born with a severe congenital malformation that resulted in the amputation of his right leg shortly after birth. "Henry, it's time for your physical therapy exercise," announced Mrs. Martha. The housekeeper, a middle-aged woman with a kind face, but always with an expression of pity when she addressed the boy. "Coming." "Mrs. Martha," Henry replied without taking his eyes off the window. "Can I have 5 more minutes?" The housekeeper sighed. "All right, my dear, but don't be long. Your father doesn't like delays in your schedule." When Mrs. Martha left, Henry continued watching the children. One of them, a boy roughly his age, noticed he was being watched and pointed to the mansion, whispering something to the others. In a few seconds, the entire group was looking at the window where Henry was. It wasn't long before they started laughing and making mocking gestures. One of them imitated someone limping, while the others laughed even louder. Henry quickly closed the curtains, feeling his face burn with shame. It wasn't the first time this had happened. He was already used to the stares, the whispers, and the taunts, but it never stopped hurting. Moving away from the window, he steered his wheelchair toward the other side of the room, where a state-of-the-art prosthesis leaned against the wall. It was the most advanced on the market, specially ordered for him by his father, Augustus Vasconcelos, one of the country's most successful businessmen. Augustus had built an empire in the construction industry, erecting some of New York City's tallest skyscrapers. His motto had always been, "There are no problems, only solutions yet to be found." Unfortunately for Augustus, his son's disability was a problem for which he continued to seek solutions. Since Henry was born, Augustus had invested millions in medical treatments, innovative prostheses, and experimental therapies. What he didn't realize was that what his son most needed couldn't be bought: friendship, acceptance, and understanding. Henry's mother, Helen Vasconcelos, was an elegant and refined woman, a former model who gave up her career to dedicate herself to her family. Unlike her husband, she tried to compensate for her son's disability with excessive protection and care, keeping him within the mansion's walls, away from dangers and, consequently, from normal experiences for a child his age. Henry never attended a regular school. His parents hired the best private tutors to educate him at home, arguing that this way he would be protected from possible bullying and discrimination. However, this decision, made with the intention of protecting him, ended up isolating him even further from the outside world. "Henry, please. It's been more than 5 minutes." Mrs. Martha's voice sounded again from the hallway. Resigned, Henry steered his chair out of the room. The hallway was wide, with gleaming marble floors and walls decorated with expensive artworks. The Vasconcelos mansion was a monument to opulence, with its 30 rooms, Olympic-sized swimming pool, private cinema, tennis court, and a garden fit for a royal palace. For Henry, however, it was a golden cage. The physical therapy room was downstairs, equipped with state-of-the-art apparatus that looked more like they belonged in a luxury rehabilitation clinic than a residence. Augustus had hired a permanent medical team to attend to his son's needs. Dr. Paul, the physical therapist, was already waiting for Henry when he entered the room. "Good morning, champ," the professional greeted, trying to sound cheerful. "Ready for another session?" Henry nodded without enthusiasm. He was tired of physical therapy sessions, medical appointments and alternative therapies. He was tired of being treated as a patient in his own home. During the session, Dr. Paul encouraged Henry to try to stand using the prosthesis, an exercise that, despite being painful, was essential for his adaptation. "That's it, Henry. You're doing great. Just a few more steps." Sweating and with his face contorted in pain, Henry managed a few steps supported by the parallel bars. Dr. Paul applauded, genuinely impressed with the progress. "I'm proud of you, kid. Your father will be thrilled when he finds out." "He won't find out," Henry replied dryly. "He's never here to see." Dr. Paul was speechless for a moment, clearly uncomfortable with the observation. "Well, he's busy, Henry. Working hard to give you all this," he said, gesturing around. "I didn't ask for all this," Henry murmured, so low that the physical therapist couldn't hear. After physical therapy, Henry returned to his room. He was exhausted, not just physically but emotionally. He picked up a book from his shelf, one of the few pleasures he found in his solitary routine. It was an adventure novel, where the protagonist traveled the world facing dangers and discovering treasures. Henry dreamed of one day having adventures like those, but he knew it was just a distant dream. As he read, he heard raised voices coming from downstairs. He immediately recognized his father's irritated tones. Augustus Vasconcelos was rarely home, always busy with meetings, business trips, and social events. When he was, he often got into heated arguments with his wife about the best treatment for Henry. "He can't go on like this, Helen." Augustus's voice echoed through the hallways. "Isolated from the world, dependent on everyone around him. This is no life." "And what do you suggest, Augustus?" Helen retorted. "Exposing him to the world out there, where he'll be ridiculed and rejected? He already suffers enough. He needs to learn to deal with reality. The world won't adapt to him. He needs to adapt to the world." Henry had heard this argument countless times. His parents fundamentally disagreed on how to handle his condition. Augustus, with his businessman's mentality, believed Henry needed to face challenges head-on, while Helen, driven by maternal instinct, wanted to protect him at all costs. "You talk as if it's simple." "Augustus," Helen continued, her voice choked with emotion, "you don't see the look in his eyes when the children in the park mock him. You don't hear him cry at night when he wakes from nightmares. And you think protecting him from those experiences will help him grow strong? Life out there is tough, Helen. If he doesn't learn to deal with it now, what will it be like when he's an adult?" The discussion continued, but Henry no longer wanted to listen. He put on his headphones and turned up the music, trying to drown out his parents' voices. He felt like a burden, the cause of constant family conflicts. The hours passed slowly, as they always did in Henry's days. His routine was monotonous and predictable. Physical therapy in the morning, private lessons until mid-afternoon, free time, which was usually filled with reading or video games, and in the evening, dinner in the silent company of his parents, when Augustus was home. During dinner that night, the atmosphere was tense. Augustus ate in silence, occasionally checking messages on his phone. Helen tried to initiate superficial conversations, talking about the weather or neighborhood news, but her attempts were met with monosyllabic replies. Henry, as usual, barely touched his food. "Did you see the news today?" Helen asked, trying once again to break the uncomfortable silence. "It looks like it's going to rain a lot in the coming days." Augustus murmured, without lifting his eyes from his phone. "It would be nice if we could plan a trip, wouldn't it, Henry?" Helen continued, looking at her son with a forced smile. "Maybe to the beach house? The doctor said the sea air would be good for you." Before Henry could answer, Augustus intervened. "We can't go now, Helen. I'm in the middle of an important negotiation. Besides, Henry can't interrupt his physical therapy." "He can continue physical therapy there, Augustus. We've talked about this. And the equipment? And Dr. Paul. We can't just move the entire structure we've set up here," Henry sighed. He was tired of being the center of these discussions, of being treated as a logistical problem to be solved. "I'm not hungry," he said, pushing his plate away. "May I be excused?" Helen looked at him with concern. "You barely touched your food, dear. Are you feeling well?" "I'm just tired," Henry lied. "Let him go, Helen," Augustus said, finally putting away his phone. "If he doesn't want to eat, we won't force him." With a nod, Henry steered his wheelchair away from the table. As he left the dining room, He could hear his mother's irritated voice. "You always do this, Augustus. You always let him do what he wants, even when it's not what's best for him." Back in his room, Henry went to the window again. The park was empty now. The children who had ridiculed him earlier had gone home. In their place, he saw a solitary girl sitting on one of the swings. She seemed to be about his age, perhaps a little younger, with dark curly hair tied in a messy ponytail. Her clothes were visibly worn, contrasting sharply with the elegant park setting. The girl swung slowly, looking up at the starry sky. Even from a distance, Henry could tell there was something different about her. It wasn't just her simple appearance, but the way she seemed perfectly comfortable in her own solitude. For a moment, Henry felt an inexplicable connection with that stranger. As he watched, a park security guard approach the girl. Henry couldn't hear what was being said, but from their body language it was clear the man was asking her to leave. The park was closing, and she probably shouldn't be there alone at that time of night. The girl got up from the swing and, instead of heading toward the main exit, began to walk toward the Vasconcelos mansion. Henry watched her, intrigued. She stopped in front of the main gate and, for a moment, looked directly at the window where he was. Their eyes met, and even at that distance, Henry felt as if she could see right through him. Nervously, he quickly closed the curtains and backed away in his wheelchair. His heart was pounding, a strange and new sensation for him. For some reason he couldn't explain. He had a premonition that this mysterious girl from the park would change his life forever. The next morning dawned grey over New York City. With heavy clouds announcing the arrival of a storm, Henry woke to the sound of distant thunder, a premonition of the tumultuous day ahead. He sat up in bed and looked at the prosthesis leaning against the headboard, a piece of advanced technology that cost the price of a luxury apartment. He sighed, wondering if he would ever feel comfortable using it. With effort, he transferred himself to his wheelchair and headed to the adapted bathroom. Despite all the independence that the expensive equipment provided him, Henry still felt incomplete, not just because of the missing leg, but because of something deeper, something no prosthesis could replace. When he finished his morning hygiene, Henry heard raised voices coming from downstairs. It wasn't uncommon to hear arguments in the Vasconcelos mansion, but something about those voices seemed different. Curious, he approached his bedroom door and opened it, letting the voices reach his ears more clearly. "What was that girl doing trying to get onto our property?" Augustus's voice sounded irritated. "Where is the security we pay so much for?" "Sir, she said she came looking for work," a male voice replied, which Henry recognized as Carlos, the mansion's head of security. "She said she heard the family was looking for someone to help with gardening." "And you believed that story?" Augustus retorted. "It's obviously a strategy to get in and observe the house. She's probably linked to some group planning a robbery." "Augustus, please," Helen interrupted. "She's just a child." "Look at her." Henry felt his heart quicken. A girl? Could it be the same one he had seen in the park the night before? Driven by curiosity, Henry steered his chair into the hallway and silently approached the stairs. The mansion had an internal elevator, specially installed for him, but at that moment Henry just wanted to observe without being noticed. From his position, he could partially see the entrance hall. And there she was, the same girl from the park. Up close, Henry could observe her better. She must have been about 11, with dark curly hair falling over her shoulders, brown skin and almond-shaped eyes that seemed to absorb everything around her. Her clothes were simple but clean, a faded t-shirt, jeans worn at the knees and scuffed sneakers. Despite her evident poverty, there was a dignity in the way she carried herself, facing Augustus Vasconcelos's intimidating gaze without showing fear. "What's your name, girl?" Augustus asked, crossing his arms. "Rachel, sir," she replied with a clear, firm voice. "Rachel Silver. And where are your parents, Rachel?" The girl hesitated for a moment, and Henry noticed a brief flash of sadness in her eyes before she regained her composure. "I don't have parents, sir," she finally replied. "I grew up in the St. Francis orphanage, but I ran away a few months ago. Now I'm on my own." Helen brought a hand to her chest, visibly moved. "You ran away from the orphanage? Why?" "It wasn't a good place for me," Rachel said simply. "I prefer to take care of myself." "And how have you been surviving?" Augustus asked, still suspicious. "I do odd jobs here and there," Rachel replied. I clean yards, run errands, help at the markets. I sleep where I can, sometimes in the park across the street, sometimes in shelters when it rains a lot. Henry felt a wave of empathy for the girl. Despite all the differences between them, he heir to a fortune, living in a mansion full of luxuries, she an orphan living on the streets, both shared a form of loneliness. "Augustus," Helen said softly, "we can't just send her away. It's about to rain and she has nowhere to go." Augustus frowned, still reluctant. "And what do you suggest, Helen? That we invite her to live with us?" "That's not it," Helen quickly replied. "But we could give her something to eat, maybe some money to help her. And encourage this life on the streets? She should be in school or back at the orphanage." "I can read and write," Rachel interrupted, surprising everyone. "The aunt at the orphanage taught me. And I can count money too. I'm not stupid." Augustus seemed surprised by the girl's audacity. "No one said you're stupid, girl. But a child your age shouldn't be wandering the streets." "It's dangerous. More dangerous than in the orphanage, where the older children beat the younger ones and the adults pretended not to see," Rachel retorted, with a maturity that belied her age. An uncomfortable silence followed Rachel's words. Helen and Augustus exchanged glances, uncertain how to proceed. It was at that moment that Henry decided to reveal himself. "Father, mother," he called, maneuvering his wheelchair toward the internal elevator. When the elevator reached the ground floor and the doors opened, all eyes turned to Henry. Rachel, who until then didn't know of his existence, watched him with curiosity, but without the usual discomfort or pity that Henry was accustomed to receiving. "Henry, go back to your room," Helen said quickly. "We're dealing with something here." "I heard the conversation," Henry admitted, approaching. "You're talking about the girl from the park." Rachel tilted her head slightly, studying Henry. "You saw me in the park last night?" Henry felt his face heat up. "I saw from my bedroom window," he explained. "You were on the swing and then the security guard asked you to leave." "Yes, he always does that," Rachel said with a shrug. "Says the park is no place for people like me after dark." Augustus seemed impatient with the interaction. "Henry, as your mother said, go back to your room. We're going to give the girl something to eat and then call social services. They'll know what to do." "No!" Rachel exclaimed, suddenly alarmed. "If you call social services, they'll send me back to the orphanage. Please don't do that." Henry looked at the girl, feeling an inexplicable connection with her. There was something in her eyes, a combination of strength and vulnerability that touched him deeply. "Father," Henry said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice, "let her stay. At least until the rain passes." Augustus frowned, clearly annoyed by his son challenging his authority. "Henry, you don't understand. We can't just shelter anyone who knocks on our door." "She's not just anyone," Henry insisted. "She needs help." Helen, observing the determination in her son's gaze, something she rarely saw, intervened. "Augustus, maybe we should listen to Henry. After all, he hardly ever asks for anything." Augustus looked from Helen to Henry, and finally to Rachel, who remained standing, arms crossed, a defiant expression on her face, despite the evident vulnerability of her situation. "Very well," he finally conceded. "She can stay until the rain passes. Mrs. Martha," he called, and the housekeeper appeared promptly. "Take this girl to the kitchen and give her something to eat. Then prepare the guest room on the second floor. She'll stay with us until the weather improves." Rachel seemed genuinely surprised by the turn of events. "Thank you, sir," she said with a sincerity that contrasted with her previous posture. "Don't thank me yet," Augustus replied dryly, "and don't get used to it. As soon as the weather improves, we'll decide what to do with you." As Mrs. Martha led Rachel toward the kitchen, the girl turned and cast a glance at Henry, a look that seemed to say thank you in a much more significant way than her previous words. When the two disappeared down the hallway, Augustus turned to Henry. "I hope you understand what you're doing, son. We know nothing about this girl." "I know she's alone," Henry replied simply. "Like me." The words hit Augustus like a slap. Helen covered her mouth with her hand, visibly shaken. Henry, without waiting for a response, turned his chair and headed for the elevator, leaving his parents stunned in the entrance hall. Back in his room, Henry felt an unusual agitation. For the first time in a long time, he was genuinely curious about another person. Who really was that girl? What had her life been like? What had led her to the streets? And why did he feel that strange connection with her? The sky darkened further, and soon the rain began to fall, first as a light drizzle, then quickly turning into a downpour. Lightning cut across the New York City sky, momentarily illuminating Henry's room. He remained by the window, watching the rain, lost in thought. A soft knock on the door interrupted his reflections. "Come in," he said, expecting it to be his mother or Mrs. Martha. To his surprise, it was Rachel who opened the door. She was clean, her hair damp from a shower. And she was wearing clothes that were clearly not hers, probably borrowed from a house employee, as they were a bit too big for her. "Your mother said I could come visit you," Rachel explained, standing at the door. "But if you prefer to be alone, I understand." Henry felt his heart quicken again. "No, it's fine. Come in." Rachel timidly stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the luxurious surroundings with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Henry's room was spacious, with a king-size bed, a bookshelf full of books, a state-of-the-art television, video games, a high-performance computer, and various electronic devices. "Wow. Your room is bigger than the whole house I lived in with my mother before she—" Rachel cut herself off, as if she had said more than she intended. "Before she what?" Henry asked, curious. "Nothing," Rachel quickly replied. "It's not important." There was a moment of uncomfortable silence between them. Henry realized he had never really talked to someone his age before, not like this, alone in his room. He didn't quite know what to say. "Thanks for defending me downstairs," Rachel said finally, breaking the silence. "Your father clearly didn't want me to stay." "He's suspicious of everyone," Henry replied, shrugging. "It's nothing personal." "No, it is," Rachel retorted with a slight smile. "It's because I'm poor. Rich people always think poor people just want to scam or steal." Henry felt uncomfortable with Rachel's frankness. No one had ever spoken to him that way before. "Not everyone thinks like that," he said defensively. "Almost everyone," Rachel insisted. "But it's okay, I'm used to it." She approached the bookshelf, running her fingers over the spines. "Have you read all these?" "Most of them," Henry replied, watching her. "I have a lot of free time." "I like to read too," Rachel said, pulling a book from the shelf. "Actually, it's one of the few good things about the orphanage. They had a small library there." She opened the book she had picked up, a copy of The Little Prince, and began to leaf through it distractedly. Henry noticed that she seemed genuinely interested. She wasn't just pretending to impress him. "That's one of my favorites," Henry commented. Rachel smiled. "Mine too. What is essential is invisible to the eye, right?" She returned the book to the shelf and turned to Henry. "So what happened to your leg?" The direct question caught Henry by surprise. No one ever asked him about his disability so openly. People usually avoided the subject, as if it was something shameful or taboo. "I was born this way," he replied after a moment of hesitation. "I had a congenital malformation, and the doctors had to amputate my right leg shortly after I was born." "That must be difficult," Rachel commented, without a drop of the pity Henry was used to hearing. It was just an observation, said as naturally as one would comment on the weather. "Yeah, sometimes it is," Henry admitted. "But the worst part isn't the missing leg itself. It's how people treat me because of it." "How do they treat you?" "Like I'm made of glass. Like I can't do anything on my own. Or they look at me with pity, or they get uncomfortable, or they avoid me completely." Rachel nodded, understanding. "I know what it's like to be treated differently. When you're poor, people also look at you strangely, like you're less than them or like you're dangerous just for existing." Henry had never thought of it that way before. For him, the physical disability was what marked him as different, but he had never considered how other characteristics, like social status, could provoke the same kind of segregation. "I guess we're similar then," he said, with a small smile. "We're completely different," Rachel corrected, laughing. "You're rich, I'm poor. You have a family, I have no one. You have a giant house, I don't even have a roof." "But we both know what it's like to be treated differently," Henry insisted. "And we both know what it's like to feel alone." Rachel looked at him for a long moment, as if seeing him for the first time. "Yeah, I guess you're right about that." A particularly loud clap of thunder made the house shake. Rachel gave a small jump, visibly startled. "Are you afraid of storms?" Henry asked. "A little," Rachel admitted. "When you live on the street, storms are dangerous. I've seen people lose what little they had because of floods." Henry imagined what it would be like to live like that, without the security of a roof over one's head, at the mercy of the elements. His own life, despite the limitations imposed by his disability, suddenly seemed extremely privileged in comparison. "Well, at least today you're safe," he said. "For today," Rachel agreed with a sigh. "But what about tomorrow?" And after that? Before Henry could answer, Helen appeared at the bedroom door. "Children, dinner is served," she announced. She seemed slightly surprised to see the two talking so naturally. "We're coming, Mother," Henry replied. When Helen left, Rachel approached Henry and, to his surprise, extended her hand. "Do you want help getting to the dining room?" Henry hesitated. He wasn't used to accepting help, especially from someone who seemed as fragile as Rachel. But there was something in the way she offered it, without pity, without discomfort, just a natural gesture between friends that made him accept. "Thank you," he said, taking her hand. Together they left the room, Henry in his wheelchair and Rachel walking beside him. For the first time in a long time, Henry didn't feel alone. The storm that hit New York City showed no sign of letting up in the following days. Torrential rains caused flooding in various parts of the city, closing streets and paralyzing traffic. It was as if the sky conspired to keep Rachel in the Vasconcelos mansion for longer. And to everyone's surprise, especially Augustus's, the girl's presence began to bring a different atmosphere to that usually silent house. Breakfast at the Vasconcelos mansion was normally a quiet, mechanical affair. Augustus, when present, remained absorbed in economic news on his tablet, while Helen flipped through interior design or fashion magazines, and Henry ate quietly, rarely lifting his eyes from his plate. But that morning, the third day of Rachel's stay, the dynamic was different. "Have you ever seen how the neighborhood cats gather near that restaurant on the corner of the street downstairs?" Rachel commented as she spread jam on toast. "I think the owner must feed them. There's an orange cat that always sits in the window, like he's the lookout for the group." Henry smiled, imagining the scene. "Do you like cats?" "I love all animals," Rachel replied. "At the orphanage there was a stray dog I called Fudge, because he was all brown. He followed me everywhere. He was the hardest thing to leave behind when I ran away." Helen, who had been observing the interaction between the two with a mixture of fascination and concern, intervened. "Do you miss the orphanage, Rachel?" The girl chewed her toast slowly, thoughtfully. "Some people, yes. Aunt Zélie, who taught me to read, and some friends. But I don't miss what it was like living there. Too many children together, not enough attention, and some older kids who like to pick on the younger ones." "And how do you survive alone on the streets?" Augustus asked unexpectedly, lowering his tablet. It was the first time he had spoken directly to Rachel since allowing her stay. Rachel was not intimidated by his inquisitive tone. "I manage, sir. I do odd jobs, run errands, help at the market stalls, sometimes clean yards. People like to help when they see I'm willing to work." "What about school?" Augustus insisted. "A girl your age should be studying." "I study on my own," Rachel replied with a touch of pride. "I read books I can borrow, and sometimes I sit outside some schools to listen to the lessons through the windows." Henry watched the interaction with growing admiration. Rachel's determination, her resilience in the face of such adverse circumstances, was something he had never witnessed before. Compared to him, who had everything money could buy but felt incomplete and useless, Rachel seemed whole, strong, capable of facing the world despite all difficulties. "You're very clever," Henry commented, with genuine respect. Rachel smiled, an open smile that lit up her face. "I manage. You learn to be clever when you don't have a choice." After breakfast, while Helen retired for her daily activities and Augustus prepared to go to the office, Henry and Rachel were left to their own devices. It was the first time Henry didn't have classes or therapies scheduled for the morning. The storm had caused his private tutors and therapists to cancel their visits. "What do you usually do all day?" Rachel asked as they left the dining room. "Normally I have classes in the morning and physical therapy in the afternoon," Henry replied. "When I'm free I read, play video games, watch TV. Nothing too exciting." "You never leave this house?" Rachel asked, surprised. "Rarely. My parents prefer me to stay here where it's safe." The last word was said with a hint of bitterness. Rachel frowned. "This is a prison, not a home. You need to see the world out there." "It's not that simple," Henry sighed, indicating his wheelchair. "People look at me differently, and many places aren't accessible." "So what?" Rachel retorted with her characteristic frankness. People look at me differently too. They think I'm going to steal just because I'm poor, but I don't let that stop me from living." Henry felt simultaneously challenged and inspired by Rachel's words. It was true that he had allowed fear, his own and his parents', to keep him isolated from the world. But could that change? "It's raining heavily today," Henry observed, looking out the window. "We can't go out." "Who says we need to go out to have fun?" Rachel replied with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "This house is huge. There must be a million interesting things to do in here." "Like what?" "I don't know. Let's explore and find out." The idea of exploring his own home was something that had never occurred to Henry. He had lived there since he was born, but he realized he only knew a fraction of the place. Many rooms remained closed, rarely visited, especially since he started using a wheelchair and the elevator, limiting his movements to certain areas of the mansion. "All right," he agreed, feeling a wave of excitement he hadn't experienced in a long time. "Where do we start?" "With the most interesting place in the house, of course," Rachel replied animatedly. "And what would that place be?" "The kitchen," she exclaimed, laughing. "It's always the best place in any house." Henry smiled, infected by Rachel's enthusiasm. Together they headed to the kitchen, where Mrs. Martha and the other staff were preparing lunch. At first, the women were surprised by the arrival of the two, especially Henry, who rarely visited that part of the house. "What are you doing here, children?" Mrs. Martha asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Henry, does your mother know you're wandering around the house?" "We're just exploring, Mrs. Martha," Henry replied. "And no, my mother doesn't know." "But what's the problem?" "It's my house, isn't it?" Mrs. Martha seemed momentarily disconcerted by Henry's assertive response, something unusual from him. Rachel smiled discreetly, noticing the change in the boy's behavior. "Of course it is, my dear," Mrs. Martha finally replied. "We're just not used to seeing you around here." "Well, you should get used to it," Henry said, with a new tone of confidence in his voice. "And what are you cooking?" "It smells delicious." The staff exchanged surprised glances, but soon smiled, happy to see their young master interested in their activities. They began to show the two what they were preparing: a succulent chicken stroganoff, white rice, homemade potato sticks, and a colorful salad. "Can I help prepare something?" Rachel asked, looking with fascination at the sophisticated kitchen utensils. "I want to help too," Henry added, to everyone's surprise. Mrs. Martha hesitated. "I don't know if Mrs. Helen would approve." "She's very careful with you, Henry." "Please, Mrs. Martha," Henry insisted. "I've never done anything in the kitchen before. I want to learn." Touched by the request and seeing the sparkle of enthusiasm in the boy's eyes, something she rarely saw, Mrs. Martha relented. "All right, but no touching knives or fire, understood?" The two agreed, animated. Soon Henry and Rachel were helping prepare dessert, a condensed milk pudding. Rachel, to the staff's surprise, proved skilled in the kitchen. She explained that she used to help in the orphanage kitchen, and sometimes also cooked for herself when she could access a stove. Henry watched, amazed as Rachel's small but agile hands cracked eggs precisely, mixed ingredients, and caramelized sugar in the mold. Under Mrs. Martha's guidance and with Rachel's help, he also participated, feeling useful and capable for the first time in a long time. "You're very good at this," Rachel commented, when Henry managed to crack an egg perfectly into the bowl, without dropping any shell fragments. "Really?" he asked with a shy smile. "Really," Rachel confirmed. "You have steady hands. That's important in the kitchen." The compliment, simple but sincere, made Henry feel strangely proud. It was rare for him to receive compliments for his abilities. Usually people praised him for his courage or strength in dealing with his disability, which always sounded false and condescending. But Rachel's compliment was different. It was specific, honest, related to something he had actually done well. While the pudding baked in the oven, the two continued their exploration of the mansion. Henry took Rachel to the private cinema in the basement, a luxurious room with reclining leather armchairs and a giant screen. Rachel gasped. "You have an entire cinema in your house?" she exclaimed incredulously. "I've never been to a real cinema in my life." "Never?" Henry asked, surprised. He rarely used that room and suddenly realized how privileged he was. "Never," Rachel confirmed. "I mean, I've seen movies on the TV in the orphanage's common room, but never in a real cinema. Then we have to watch a movie here before you leave, Henry said, before realizing what he had said. The idea of Rachel leaving, going back to the streets or the orphanage, suddenly saddened him. Rachel seemed to notice the change in his expression. "Hey, don't be sad," she said, lightly touching Henry's arm. "We can watch a movie right now if you want." Henry smiled, grateful for how Rachel knew how to change the subject at the right time. "Sure, let's watch." "What kind of movie do you like?" "Adventure," Rachel replied without hesitation. "I like stories where people travel to distant places and have incredible experiences." "Me too," Henry agreed. He selected a recent adventure movie, a story about a group of children who discover a secret passage to a magical world. As they watched, Rachel reacted enthusiastically to every scene, applauding, laughing loudly, occasionally holding Henry's hand during suspenseful moments. For Henry, the experience was revealing. He had seen that movie before, but seeing it through Rachel's eyes with her spontaneous and emotional reactions was like seeing it for the first time. He found himself watching her face more than the screen, fascinated by the sparkle in her eyes, by the way she completely immersed herself in the narrative. When the movie ended, Rachel was exultant. "That was amazing," she exclaimed, jumping from her armchair. "Can we watch another one?" Henry laughed. "Maybe later. It must be lunchtime by now, and our pudding should be ready." Indeed. When they returned to the kitchen, the pudding had already cooled and was being unmolded by Mrs. Martha. The sight of the perfect dessert, with its golden caramel dripping down the sides, filled them both with pride. "It looks beautiful," Rachel exclaimed. "And it was made by you two," Mrs. Martha smiled, genuinely pleased with the result. "Henry, I never imagined you'd have a talent for cooking." "Neither did I," Henry admitted, feeling strangely accomplished. Lunch was served, and to Helen's surprise, Henry insisted that Rachel sit at the main table with them, not in the kitchen with the staff, as Helen had initially suggested. Augustus was not present. He had managed to get to the office despite the rain and would not return for lunch. "So, children, what did you do this morning?" Helen asked, trying to keep the conversation light. "We explored the house," Henry replied, "and we made pudding for dessert." Helen almost choked on her wine. "You what?" "We made pudding, Mother," Henry repeated calmly. "Rachel taught me." Helen looked at Rachel, who kept her eyes down, focused on her plate. "I see," she finally said. "I hope you didn't make too much mess in the kitchen." "We didn't, ma'am," Rachel quickly replied. "Mrs. Martha supervised us the whole time." Helen murmured, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of her son in the kitchen doing household chores. "And you watched a movie, from what I was told." "Yes, in the cinema downstairs," Henry confirmed. Rachel had never been to a cinema before. Helen cast a quick glance at Rachel, a mixture of pity and discomfort. "Well, that's sad." "Not really," Rachel retorted, surprising Helen. "There are many good things I've never done, but there are also many good things I have done that many people haven't. It's just a matter of perspective." Helen blinked, disconcerted by the girl's mature and philosophical response. Henry smiled, proud of his new friend. After lunch, during which the pudding was served and praised by Helen, Henry and Rachel retired to the mansion's library. It was a vast space, with dark wooden bookshelves reaching from floor to ceiling, filled with books of all eras and genres. A rolling ladder allowed access to the highest shelves, and comfortable leather armchairs were arranged around an ornate fireplace. Rachel was amazed. "My goodness, so many books. Have you read all of them?" "Not half," Henry admitted. "Some were my grandfather's, others my father bought more for decoration than to be read." "What a waste," Rachel commented, running her fingers over the spines of the books. "So many stories, so many adventures waiting to be discovered." Henry watched her with new eyes. "You really love to read, don't you?" "It's my escape," Rachel replied simply. "When I read, I can go anywhere, be anyone. I can forget that I'm alone, that I'm hungry, that I'm cold. For a few hours, I live in another world." Rachel's frankness touched Henry deeply. For him, reading had always been a pastime, a way to fill empty hours. For Rachel, it was much more. It was survival. It was freedom. "What kind of book do you like best?" he asked, approaching one of the shelves. "Adventure, mystery, fantasy, anything that takes me away from reality," Rachel replied. "But I also like books that teach me useful things. I've read books about medicinal plants, about how to fix things, about geography and history. I have many of those books here, Henry said enthusiastically. Come, I'll show you. He guided Rachel through the library, showing her his favorite sections. To his surprise, he discovered they shared many common tastes. Both loved adventure and mystery stories. Both were interested in science and history. Both had a natural curiosity about the world. As they browsed the shelves, Rachel found a thick book on Greek mythology. I love these stories, she commented, flipping through the pages. The gods, the heroes, the monsters. It's like it's real. Do you know the story of Hephaestus? Henry asked suddenly. The blacksmith god? Rachel replied. Yes, he was lame and was rejected by his own mother, Hera, who threw him from Mount Olympus because of his deformity. But he became the most skilled of the gods, creating incredible weapons and magical objects. Henry looked at Rachel with admiration. Exactly. It's one of my favorite stories. Because you identify with him, Rachel observed perceptively. Yes, Henry admitted. I like to think that, like Hephaestus, I can create incredible things even with my limitations. And you can, Rachel affirmed with conviction. In fact, I bet you can do much more than you imagine. Like what? I don't know. Anything you want. Painting, writing, programming, cooking. You saw how good you were in the kitchen today. What else would you like to try? Henry thought for a moment. I've always wanted to learn to play the piano, he confessed. We have a grand piano in the music room, but I never had the courage to ask for lessons. I thought my parents would think it's a waste of time, since I have physical therapy and treatments to focus on. Waste of time? Rachel exclaimed, indignant. How can learning something new be a waste of time? Come on, I want to see this piano. Without waiting for a response, she walked toward the library door. Henry followed her, surprised but excited by her enthusiasm. Together they headed to the music room, a room that was rarely used since Henry's grandmother, who played the piano, had passed away. The grand piano was there, majestic, covered by a thin layer of dust. Rachel ran her fingers over the keys softly, producing a few random notes. I don't know how to play, she admitted, but I've always wanted to learn too. We can learn together, Henry suggested, feeling a wave of excitement. I can ask my father to hire a teacher. Or we can start on our own, Rachel proposed. I bet there are books about it in the library, and nowadays there are so many tutorials online. Do you think we could do it? Why not? We don't need to become virtuosos overnight. We can start with the basics, learn a simple song. It would be fun. The idea was tempting. Henry imagined himself playing, creating music with his own hands. It was something he had never seriously considered, but now with Rachel by his side it seemed possible, achievable. Let's do it, he decided, approaching the piano. Let's learn together. Rachel smiled, that wide, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. It's a deal. We can start tomorrow if you want. Why not now? Henry asked, surprising himself with his own impatience. Now? Rachel laughed. All right, let's see what we can do. They spent the next few hours experimenting with the piano, trying to decipher the notes, laughing at their mistakes, celebrating small successes. Neither of them had any musical knowledge, but that didn't diminish their enthusiasm. Henry discovered that his hands were naturally agile on the keyboard, while Rachel had a good ear for recognizing when a note sounded wrong. When Helen found them hours later, both were absorbed in trying to play a simplified version of Happy Birthday, laughing uncontrollably at every mistake. For a moment she stood at the door watching them unnoticed. Her son, who had always been so quiet, so resigned to his condition, was now radiant, alive, laughing as she had never seen him laugh before. And all because of that street girl, that stranger, who had entered their lives so unexpectedly. Helen felt a confused mixture of emotions, gratitude for the joy Rachel brought to Henry, but also a certain jealousy, a pang of resentment that it hadn't been her, his own mother, who managed to elicit those laughs from him. I see you've discovered the piano, she finally commented, announcing her presence. The two turned, surprised. Mother! Henry exclaimed. We're learning to play. Isn't it amazing? Yes, it's unexpected, Helen replied, trying to smile. I didn't know you were interested in music, Henry. Neither did I, he admitted, with an enthusiasm Helen rarely saw. But Rachel convinced me to try, and it's been a lot of fun. Helen looked at Rachel, who lowered her eyes, suddenly shy. Well, I'm glad you're having fun, Helen said with a forced smile. But it's getting late, and you haven't had your snack yet. Mrs. Martha prepared a special snack on the covered porch since the rain has let up. Great, I'm starving, Henry said, maneuvering his chair toward the door. Before following Henry, Rachel stopped beside Helen. I'm sorry if we made too much noise. Ma'am, she said in a low voice. Helen looked at the girl, noticing for the first time the sincerity in her eyes. It's all right, Rachel, she replied with more kindness than she intended. It's good to see Henry having fun. He doesn't have many opportunities for that. Rachel nodded, understanding, and followed Henry out of the room. Helen remained behind, contemplating the piano that had been silent for so long. Perhaps, she thought, the arrival of that girl wasn't as bad as she had initially imagined. Perhaps she was bringing something Henry desperately needed. Not just friendship, but also the courage to explore a world beyond his limitations. A week had passed since Rachel's arrival at the Vasconcelos mansion. The rain had finally ceased, and New York City was returning to its normal routine. The streets once flooded were now dry, and chaotic traffic once again dominated the avenues. There were no more climatic excuses to keep the street girl under the family's luxurious roof. Augustus Vasconcelos, who had remained distant for much of that week, absorbed in business and meetings, now paced back and forth in his mansion office, visibly agitated. Helen sat on the leather sofa, watching her husband with a worried expression. Augustus, we have to discuss the girl's situation, Helen said, breaking the tense silence that hung between them. What situation? Augustus retorted, irritated. We agreed to shelter her during the storm. The storm is over. She must leave. Helen bit her lip, hesitant. Have you seen how different Henry is since she arrived? He's happier, more engaged. He even started showing interest in the piano. And that's her doing, Augustus questioned defensively. Perhaps he just needed company his own age. We can hire a young tutor, or enroll him in activities with other children from families like ours. It's not the same, and you know it, Helen sighed. There's something special about the way Rachel treats Henry. She doesn't see his disability. She doesn't treat him like he's made of glass. She challenges him, encourages him to try new things. Augustus stopped pacing and faced his wife. And what are you getting at, Helen? Are you suggesting we adopt a street girl, just because she's good for our son? No, of course not, Helen quickly replied, although the idea had already crossed her mind. But maybe we can help her in some way. Enroll her in a school, perhaps find a decent adoptive family for her. And meanwhile she stays here living under our roof, influencing our son with God knows what kind of ideas. What ideas, Augustus? Helen questioned, starting to get annoyed by her husband's resistance. The idea that he's capable of more than we imagined? The idea that he doesn't need to be limited by his disability? Are those bad influences? Augustus sighed, running his hand through his gray hair. You know that's not what I meant. But we don't know this girl, Helen. We know nothing about her past, about her family. And she's been living on the streets. Who knows what kind of habits she's developed there? She's just a child, Augustus. A child who, despite all adversities, has maintained her kindness and intelligence. You need to see how she is with Henry, how they talk about books, how she encourages him. Augustus sat heavily in his armchair, contemplating his wife's words. Deep down, he too had noticed the change in Henry. His son, always so quiet and resigned, now seemed more alive, more present. The few times he had dined with the family that week, he had been surprised to see Henry chatting animatedly, laughing, even telling jokes. It was as if a light, long extinguished, had been rekindled in him. All right, Augustus finally conceded. She can stay a few more days while we decide what to do. But I want it to be clear that this is temporary. I'll ask my assistant to research options for good quality orphanages or reliable adoption programs. Helen nodded, relieved to have at least secured this small postponement. Thank you, Augustus. I know you only want what's best for our family. Meanwhile, in the mansion garden, Henry and Rachel enjoyed the sun that finally shone after days of rain. They sat under the shade of a leafy mango tree, Henry in his wheelchair and Rachel on the lawn, legs crossed. Between them, a chessboard. Checkmate, Rachel announced, moving her queen to an attacking position against Henry's king. Again? Henry groaned, feigning despair. How did you get so good at this in just 1 week? Rachel laughed, that crystalline laugh Henry had learned to adore. I already knew how to play a little. At the orphanage there was an old man who visited us sometimes, Mr. Josiah. He was a chess master and taught the interested children. I was one of the few who had the patience to learn. Well, you're really good, Henry admitted, rearranging the pieces for a new game. But don't think I'll give up. One day I'll beat you. I'm counting on it, Rachel smiled. Then her smile disappeared, replaced by a more serious expression. Henry, the rain has stopped. Henry felt a tightening in his chest. He knew what that meant. He had overheard fragments of his parents' conversations in recent days. He knew they were just waiting for the rain to end to resolve Rachel's situation, as his father used to say. I know, he replied, lowering his eyes to the board. But that doesn't mean you have to leave immediately, right? Rachel shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant, but Henry could see the tension in her shoulders. I guess it doesn't depend on me, does it? Your parents were very kind to let me stay during the storm, but now you're still my friend, Henry finished firmly. And friends don't abandon friends. Rachel smiled, touched by Henry's loyalty. You're amazing, you know, but you're also realistic. Your parents will never allow a street girl to live in their mansion indefinitely. Why not? Henry challenged. We have more space than we need. You could have your own room, go to school, have a normal life. A normal life? Rachel laughed, but it was a humorless laugh. Henry, nothing in my life has been normal so far. Why would it start now? Because I'm going to talk to my parents, Henry decided, with a determination that surprised even himself. I'm going to convince them to let you stay. Before Rachel could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Sonia, Henry's cousin, Helen's sister's daughter. Sonia was 14, with perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothes that screamed money. She rarely visited her cousin, usually only on formal occasions like birthdays or holidays. Hi, Henry, Sonia greeted with a forced smile. Her blue eyes scrutinized Rachel from head to toe, a quick but critical assessment. And you must be the street girl Aunt Helen mentioned. Henry felt his face flush with anger. Sonia, this is my friend Rachel. Rachel, this is my cousin Sonia. Nice to meet you, Rachel said politely, standing up to greet the newcomer. Sonia ignored Rachel's outstretched hand, turning back to Henry. Your mother asked me to call you too. It seems Uncle Augustus wants to have a talk with everyone. Henry's heart quickened. He exchanged a worried glance with Rachel, who seemed equally apprehensive. We're coming, he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Sonia turned and walked back to the mansion, her expensive perfume leaving a trail in the air. Rachel watched her walk away before turning to Henry. Your cousin doesn't like me much, does she? She commented with an ironic smile. Sonia doesn't like anyone but herself, Henry replied with a grimace. Don't take it personally. They put away the chess set in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they headed back to the house, Henry felt a growing determination. He would not allow them to separate him from the only true friend he had ever had. In the main living room, Augustus and Helen waited, along with Sonia and her parents, Edward and Camilla. Edward was a corpulent man, with a thick mustache and a booming laugh. He was Augustus's partner in some ventures, and shared many of his conservative views. Camilla, Helen's sister, was an elegant woman, always impeccably dressed and made up, known for her sharp tongue and biting comments. Ah, finally, Camilla exclaimed when Henry and Rachel entered the room. We've been waiting for you. Sorry, Aunt, Henry replied, maneuvering his chair into the free space between the sofas. Rachel stood beside him, visibly uncomfortable under the scrutinizing gazes of the adults. So this is the famous Rachel, Edward commented, examining the girl with curiosity. Helen told us about you, young lady. It seems you've been a good influence on our Henry. Rachel blushed slightly but maintained an upright posture. Henry is my friend, she replied simply. Friends help each other. Camilla murmured with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And how long do you intend to stay, dear? Now that the rain has passed, I imagine you'll want to go back to, well, wherever you live. Camilla's condescending tone made Henry clench his fists. Rachel has nowhere to go back to, Aunt, he replied, before the girl could speak. And I would like her to stay here. Henry, Helen exclaimed, surprised by her son's assertiveness. Augustus cleared his throat, taking control of the situation. In fact, that's why we called this little family meeting. As everyone knows, Rachel has been with us during the week of the storm. Now we need to decide what the next step will be. It seems obvious to me, Edward commented, shrugging. The girl needs to go back into the system. Orphanage, adoption, whatever. It's not your responsibility, Augustus. That's exactly what I said, Augustus agreed. But Helen raised some interesting points about how the girl's presence has been beneficial for Henry. And is that more important than her well-being? Camilla questioned with false concern. A child needs stability, a real family, not a temporary arrangement, however luxurious. I don't need luxury, Rachel intervened, surprising everyone. I never had it, and I've survived well enough until now. See? Camilla smiled as if Rachel's words proved her point. The girl is strong, independent. She'll be fine. That's not fair, Henry protested, feeling his face flush with anger. Rachel is my friend, and she's been better for me than any doctor, therapist, or teacher you've ever hired. Why can't she stay? Henry dear, Helen began in a placating tone. It's not that simple. There are legal issues to consider, paperwork, school... And since when do you care about legal issues? Henry retorted, with a bitterness that surprised everyone. Father solves everything with money, doesn't he? Why would this be any different? Henry, Augustus exclaimed, shocked by his son's audacity. That's enough. You're being disrespectful. No, I'm being honest, Henry insisted, feeling a courage he had never experienced before. You always say you want what's best for me, that you'd do anything to make me happy. Well, Rachel makes me happy. She's the only person who treats me like normal, who makes me feel capable. And now you want to send her away? A heavy silence fell over the room. Helen looked at her son with a mixture of surprise and admiration. Augustus seemed torn between irritation at his son's insubordination and understanding of his words. Edward and Camilla exchanged uncomfortable glances, while Sonia watched the scene with a malicious glint in her eyes. May I speak? Rachel asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm but firm. I know I'm just a guest here, and I have no right to comment on family matters, but this conversation is about me, so I think I deserve to be heard. Augustus, after a moment of hesitation, nodded. Go ahead, girl. First, I want to thank you for taking me in during the storm. You didn't have to do it, but you did, and I'm very grateful. Rachel paused, carefully choosing her next words. Second, I understand that my presence here is temporary. I've always known that. I don't expect you to adopt me or give me a permanent place in your family. Rachel, Henry began, but she raised her hand, asking to continue. Third, Henry is my friend, and I care about him very much too. These days together have been the best of my life, but I don't want to be a problem for anyone. If it's best for everyone that I leave, then I will. Helen felt her eyes well up with tears at the girl's maturity and dignity. Even Augustus seemed impressed by Rachel's articulate and thoughtful speech. And where would you go, dear? Helen asked with genuine concern. Rachel shrugged. I'd go back to the streets, I suppose. Or try to find another orphanage, maybe in another city, where no one knows me. No, Henry exclaimed, grabbing Rachel's hand. You're not going to live on the streets again. I won't let you. It's not your decision, Henry, Augustus said, though his tone had softened. But, he added, looking at Rachel, I'm also not comfortable with the idea of a child living on the streets or running from orphanage to orphanage. So what's the solution? Edward asked impatiently. You obviously can't adopt her. It would be a scandal. Imagine what the press would say. Construction magnate adopts street girl. Your competitors would use that against you, Augustus. Since when do we care what the press says? Helen retorted, with an unusual irritation in her normally controlled voice. We're talking about a child's future, not public relations. Helen is right, Augustus conceded, surprising everyone. This isn't about public image. It's about doing what's right. And what would be right in your opinion? Camilla asked with a touch of sarcasm. Augustus reflected for a moment. I'm not sure, but I think we need more time to decide. Rachel can stay with us for now while we explore suitable options for her future. You can't be serious, Edward protested. Augustus, you've always been a pragmatic man. Don't tell me you're letting sentimentality cloud your judgment. It's not sentimentality, Edward, Augustus retorted. It's humanity, something we may have forgotten in our pursuit of success and status. Edward scoffed, clearly annoyed, but chose not to press the issue. Camilla, on the other hand, was not willing to back down so easily. What if she's a con artist? she suggested with a malicious smile. What? If this whole story about the orphanage and living on the streets is just an invention to gain your sympathy? Street children are known to be manipulative, you know? Aunt Camilla, Henry exclaimed, horrified. How can you say such a thing? You don't even know Rachel. Us exactly, dear. None of us do. And you're ready to open your doors to her, without knowing anything about her past, her family, her intentions. I'm not a con artist, Rachel said, her voice trembling but firm. I have nothing to gain by lying. If I wanted to pull a scam, I would have invented a more dramatic story, don't you think? Maybe that my parents died tragically, or that I was abused at the orphanage. But that's not the case. The truth is simply that I ran away from the orphanage because I was unhappy there, and I've been surviving on the streets ever since. It's not a beautiful story, nor a heroic one. It's just my life. The sincerity in Rachel's words touched everyone in the room, except perhaps Camilla, who maintained her skeptical expression. Helen stood up and approached the girl, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. I believe you, Rachel, she said firmly, and I agree with Augustus. You can stay with us while we decide the best way forward. This is madness, Camilla murmured, but her voice had lost its previous conviction. Perhaps it is, Augustus agreed with a slight smile. But sometimes it takes a little madness to do the right thing. Henry looked at his parents with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. It was the first time in a long time that he felt they were truly listening to him, taking his wishes and feelings into consideration. He squeezed Rachel's hand, a silent gesture of triumph and solidarity. Thank you, Rachel whispered, tears in her eyes. I promise you won't regret it. Don't make promises you can't keep, girl, Augustus warned, but there was a hint of humor in his voice. I'm sure there will be times when all of us will question this decision. Including me, Rachel admitted with a small smile. But I promise to try my best. With the decision made, at least temporarily, the tension in the room subsided. Edward and Camilla, though clearly displeased, decided not to prolong the discussion. They announced they needed to leave, taking with them a Sonia visibly disappointed at not having witnessed a more dramatic outcome. When the three left, Augustus turned to Rachel. You understand this isn't permanent, right? We're just buying time to find a suitable solution. I understand, sir, Rachel nodded solemnly. And there are conditions, Augustus continued. You will need to attend school. Since Henry has private tutors, you can join him in classes. You will need to follow the house rules, respect schedules, and help with chores when asked. Yes, sir, Rachel agreed promptly. I will do all that and more. I can help in the kitchen, in the garden, wherever needed. You are not a servant, Rachel, Helen intervened gently. We want you to study, to have time to play, to be a child. But I want to help, Rachel insisted. I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, Henry said firmly. You're my friend. Rachel looked at him, her eyes shining with contained emotion. And you're my best friend, Henry, the only one I've ever had. In that moment, despite the uncertainties that still hung over the future, there was a sense of victory in the air. A small battle had been won, a brief postponement gained. Henry knew that the war was far from over. His Aunt Camilla certainly wouldn't give up so easily, and even his father, despite his surprising understanding, still saw the situation as temporary. But for now, Rachel would stay. And that was all that mattered. Later that night, when everyone had retired, Henry heard a soft knock on his door. It was Rachel, dressed in the borrowed pajamas that were too big for her small body. Can I come in? She asked in a low voice. Of course, Henry replied, adjusting himself in bed. Rachel entered and sat on the edge of the bed, nervously fiddling with the hem of her pajamas. I just wanted to thank you, she finally said, for what you did today, for defending me. You don't have to thank me, Henry replied. You would have done the same for me. Yes, I would have, Rachel agreed with a smile. But still, no one ever fought for me before. No one cared enough. Henry felt a lump in his throat. The idea of Rachel, so full of life and kindness, spending years without anyone caring about her, was almost unbearable. I care, he said, with all the sincerity he could muster. And my parents care too, even if they don't admit it. You'll see, Rachel. Things will work out. Do you really believe that? She asked with a vulnerability she rarely showed. I do, Henry affirmed, because I'm going to do everything I can to make it work. And you taught me that I can do much more than I thought. Rachel smiled, that wide, sincere smile that lit up her entire face. "We're a good team, aren't we?" "The best," Henry agreed, returning the smile. "The disabled and the helpless united will never be defeated." Rachel laughed, covering her mouth to keep from making noise. "I like that. Our official motto." For a moment they were silent, sharing that rare feeling of mutual understanding, of total acceptance. Two young people marked by adversity, finding comfort and strength in each other. "I'd better go back to my room," Rachel finally said. "I don't want your mother to catch me wandering around the house at night. She already has enough reasons to be suspicious of me." "My mother isn't suspicious of you," Henry corrected. "She just takes time to get used to changes. Like your father?" "Oh, my father is different. He's suspicious by nature. It's part of his job, I guess. But deep down he has a good heart. He just doesn't show it much." Rachel nodded, understanding. "Good night, Henry," she said, getting up from the bed. "See you tomorrow." "See you tomorrow, Rachel," Henry replied, watching her walk to the door. "And Rachel." She turned, her hand on the doorknob. "Yes? I'm glad you ended up here, even if it was because of a storm." "Sometimes storms bring good things," Rachel smiled. "At least that's what Aunt Zelie always said." With those words, she left, gently closing the door behind her. Henry stared at the closed door for a long time, thinking about how his life had changed drastically in just 1 week. Before Rachel arrived, he was a lonely boy, resigned to his condition, living each day the same as the last. Now he felt full of purpose, courage, and possibilities. Storms really could bring good things, he thought, as he settled down to sleep. And he would do everything to ensure that this particular change, Rachel's presence in his life, lasted much longer than a simple rainy season. The New York City autumn was advancing, painting the tree leaves with shades of red and gold. 2 months had passed since the storm that brought Rachel into the Vasconcelos' lives, and what began as a temporary shelter had transformed into something more permanent, though not officially declared. Rachel now had her own room in the mansion. New clothes, though she insisted on keeping some old pieces for sentimental value, and had been enrolled in the same private school Henry would attend the following school year. The adaptation had not been easy. There were moments of tension, especially with Augustus, who still maintained a certain distance from the girl. Helen, on the other hand, gradually lowered her defenses, recognizing the positive impact Rachel had on Henry. Henry himself blossomed in ways that surprised everyone. That Saturday morning, Dr. Paul, Henry's physical therapist, observed the young man's progress with admiration. Henry was standing, supported by parallel bars, using his prosthesis, taking firm and confident steps. "Impressive, Henry," the professional exclaimed. "Your control and balance have improved significantly. What have you been doing differently?" Henry smiled, focused on completing the circuit. "I've been practicing more," he replied simply. What he didn't mention was Rachel's crucial role in this change. In recent weeks, she had constantly challenged him to use his prosthesis more, creating games and activities that encouraged him to stand, to develop strength and confidence. "Your prosthesis is a tool, not a sentence," she would say. "You decide how to use it." When Henry completed the course and sat down, exhausted but satisfied, Dr. Paul made some notes on his clipboard. "Your progress is truly remarkable, Henry. I think we can start thinking about reducing wheelchair use in controlled environments." "Really?" Henry asked, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Really," the physical therapist confirmed. "Obviously, the chair will still be necessary for longer distances, or when you're tired. But for short movements inside the house, the prosthesis may be enough with the help of crutches." Helen, who watched the session from a corner of the room, couldn't help but smile emotionally. "This is wonderful, Doctor. We always knew Henry had potential. He just needed time." "And motivation," Dr. Paul added, with a significant look at Henry. "It seems something has changed in recent weeks." Henry knew exactly what, or rather who, had changed his perspective. Rachel not only accepted him as he was, but also constantly pushed him beyond his perceived limits. She didn't treat him as an invalid, nor did she ignore his disability. Instead, she approached it as a challenge to be overcome, not an insurmountable obstacle. "Thank you, Dr. Paul," Henry said. "Can I try walking with crutches today?" "Of course," the physical therapist smiled, picking up a pair of adjustable crutches that leaned against the wall. "Let's start slowly. While Henry practiced with the crutches, taking his first steps without the support of the parallel bars, Rachel entered the physical therapy room. She was dressed in a simple athletic outfit, her hair tied in a messy ponytail. Seeing Henry standing, using crutches, her eyes lit up. "Look who's walking like a champion," she exclaimed, approaching. Henry's smile widened. "Dr. Paul said I can start using the chair less." "I knew it," Rachel replied triumphantly. "I told you you could do it. You just needed to believe in yourself as much as I believe in you." Helen watched the interaction between the two with a mixture of gratitude and a pang of maternal jealousy. It was undeniable that Rachel had brought something to Henry's life that neither she nor all of Augustus's money had managed to provide. Genuine confidence, intrinsic motivation, and joy of living. "Rachel," Helen called after a moment, "would you mind helping Henry practice a bit today? I have an appointment in an hour and won't be able to stay for the full session." "Of course, Mrs. Helen," Rachel replied, animated. "I'd love to help." "Great," Helen smiled, though with slight hesitation. "Dr. Paul, could you instruct her on how to assist Henry correctly?" "Certainly, Mrs. Vasconcelos," the physical therapist nodded. "Although I must say, Rachel has already shown a natural instinct for it. In the last sessions she was present, her suggestions were surprisingly insightful." Helen nodded, feeling again that conflicting mix of emotions. On one hand, she was genuinely happy for Henry's progress and grateful to Rachel for her role in it. On the other, she couldn't help feeling a little replaced, as if she were failing in some fundamental aspect of motherhood that this street girl, without any experience or training, seemed to master instinctively. "Well, then I'll leave you for now," Helen said, picking up her purse. "Henry, behave and don't overdo it. Rachel, make sure he rests when necessary. Dr. Paul, I trust your professional judgment." After Helen left, the session continued with a more relaxed atmosphere. Rachel, following Dr. Paul's instructions, helped Henry practice short walks with crutches, always attentive to ensure he didn't overexert himself. What most surprised the physical therapist was the natural way the two communicated. Rachel seemed to know exactly when Henry needed encouragement, when he needed space, when he was about to give up, or when he could be pushed a little further. "You two make a great team," Dr. Paul commented, watching them with admiration. "It's because we're real friends," Rachel replied simply. "Aren't we, Henry?" "The best," he confirmed, with a tired but satisfied smile. When the session ended, Dr. Paul packed up his equipment and prepared to leave. "Henry, you did an excellent job today. Keep practicing with the crutches, but don't overdo it. Rome wasn't built in a day." "Thank you, Doctor," Henry replied. "I'll see you next week." "And Rachel," the physical therapist added, "you have a natural talent for this. Have you ever considered a career in healthcare?" Rachel seemed surprised by the suggestion. "Me, in healthcare? I never thought about it." "Well, think about it. You have empathy, patience, and a natural instinct to understand the needs of others. Those would be great qualities for a physical therapist or occupational therapist." After Dr. Paul left, Rachel and Henry were alone in the physical therapy room. Henry sat on a bench to rest while Rachel tidied up some equipment. "What do you think?" Henry asked after a moment of silence. "About what Dr. Paul said?" Rachel shrugged, trying to appear disinterested, but Henry could see a sparkle in her eyes. "I don't know. I never thought I could go to college, you know. Kids like me usually don't get those kinds of opportunities." "Kids like you?" Henry repeated, frowning. "You know, orphans from the streets. No family, no money. But you're not like that anymore, Rachel," Henry insisted. "You're here now. You're going to school, you have a home." "For now," she replied with a shadow of insecurity in her normally confident voice. "Your parents have been very generous, but I'm not naive, Henry. I know this might not last forever." Henry felt a tightening in his chest at Rachel's vulnerability. "It will last," he affirmed, with a conviction he didn't know he possessed. "I'll make sure of it." Rachel smiled, grateful for her friend's loyalty but still cautious. "Anyway, it's too early to think about college. First, I need to survive elementary school in a school full of rich kids." "You'll do great," Henry assured her. "You're the smartest person I know. And you know so many people," Rachel teased, rolling her eyes. "Hey, I know enough people." Henry protested, joining the game. "I have a very busy social life, you know. I spend my days between elderly doctors, boring private tutors, And a very annoying street girl who keeps challenging me." "Annoying street girl, huh?" Rachel laughed, grabbing a small therapeutic pillow and throwing it at Henry. "Take that, spoiled rich kid." What started as a joke soon turned into a full-blown pillow fight, with Henry and Rachel laughing uncontrollably as they hurled therapeutic cushions at each other. It was something so simple, so childish, but for Henry, it represented a freedom he rarely experienced, the freedom to be just a child, playing without worries. This was how Augustus found them when he unexpectedly entered the physical therapy room. The two were on the floor, surrounded by scattered pillows and cushions, laughing breathlessly. Seeing his father, Henry immediately became serious, expecting a reprimand for the mess and inappropriate behavior. To his surprise, Augustus merely observed the scene for a moment, with an enigmatic expression. "It seems you were having fun," he finally commented, with a tone Henry couldn't decipher. It wasn't exactly disapproval, but it wasn't complete acceptance either. "Sorry for the mess, sir," Rachel quickly said, getting up and starting to collect the cushions. "It was my fault, I started it." "Actually, it was my fault," Henry intervened, surprising himself with his assertiveness in front of his father. "Lie through the first pillow." Augustus looked from one to the other, and then, to their astonishment, a small smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Well, as long as you clean it all up before your mother sees, I see no problem with a little unconventional exercise." Henry and Rachel exchanged surprised glances. It was the first time Augustus had shown anything close to approval for their games. Perhaps Henry hoped his father was finally beginning to accept Rachel's presence in their lives. "In fact," Augustus continued, "I came looking for you because I have a proposal. Dr. Paul informed me about your progress. Henry, he thinks you're ready for more challenges." "What kind of challenges?" Henry asked, curious. "Outdoor activities for a start," Augustus replied. "I thought we'd take you both to Central Park tomorrow. It's a good place to practice with your crutches on varied terrain, but still safe. What do you think?" Henry could barely believe what he was hearing. His father rarely suggested family outings, and he certainly had never included Rachel in such plans. "That would be amazing, Father," he exclaimed enthusiastically. "Wouldn't it, Rachel?" "Yes, sir," Rachel agreed, still a little hesitant at Augustus's sudden kindness. "It would be wonderful." "Great," Augustus nodded. "So it's settled. We'll leave after breakfast, weather permitting." When Augustus left, Henry turned to Rachel with a radiant smile. "Did you see that? My father never does this kind of thing." "I think he's starting to change," Rachel observed, cautiously optimistic. "Maybe he's finally realizing that you're capable of more than he thought." "Maybe," Henry agreed. "Or maybe he's starting to like you." "Let's not get carried away," Rachel laughed, throwing another cushion at Henry. The rest of the day passed in a climate of eager anticipation. During dinner, Helen was surprised to hear about Augustus's plans for Sunday, but she enthusiastically supported the idea. There seemed to be a new family dynamic forming, still fragile, still experimental, but promising. The next morning, the sun shone in a clear sky, as if approving the family's plans. Henry woke early, too excited to sleep in. With determination, he practiced using his prosthesis and crutches to go from his room to the bathroom, a challenge he usually avoided so early in the morning. He was determined to show his father that he could handle the park outing. Breakfast was served on the porch with an almost festive atmosphere. Helen had asked the cook to prepare pancakes, Henry's favorite dish, and even Augustus seemed more relaxed than usual, reading the Sunday newspaper without his usual worried expression. "Are you ready for the park, son?" Augustus asked, lowering his newspaper for a moment. "More than ready," Henry replied with enthusiasm. "I can't wait." Rachel, who had been eating silently until then, watched the interaction with a discreet smile. She wore one of the new outfits Helen had bought for her, jeans, colorful sneakers, and a simple but pretty blouse. Her hair was tied in a neat ponytail, very different from the messy style she had arrived with months ago. "I've never been to Central Park," she commented shyly. "Never?" Helen asked, surprised. "But it's one of New York City's most famous parks." "I know," Rachel shrugged. "I've heard a lot about it, but I never had the chance to go. It's far from where I used to stay." Augustus frowned slightly, as he always did when Rachel mentioned her, passed on the streets. It was a subject that still made him uncomfortable, a reminder of the harsh realities that existed beyond the protected walls of his privileged world. "Well, today you'll have that opportunity," Helen said, trying to keep the mood light. "Central Park is truly beautiful, especially this time of year. There are lakes, gardens, museum—" "And ice cream," Henry added with a mischievous smile. "We can't forget the ice cream." "We definitely can't forget the ice cream," Augustus agreed, to general surprise. Augustus Vasconcelos rarely agreed with frivolities like ice cream on a Sunday morning. After breakfast, everyone prepared for the outing. The driver, Mr. Joseph, brought the adapted minivan to accommodate Henry's wheelchair if needed. Henry insisted on also bringing his crutches, determined to use them as much as possible during the outing. The trip to Central Park was lively, with Henry pointing out landmarks to Rachel, who observed the city with curious and amazed eyes. For her, who mainly knew the poorer neighborhoods and more degraded central areas, the tree-lined avenues and elegant neighborhoods they passed through were almost like another world. "Look, Rachel," Henry exclaimed, as the car finally entered the park. "There's the Museum of Modern Art, and further on is the lake. It's huge." Rachel admired, looking out the window. "It feels like there's room to breathe here." "There's plenty of room," Helen confirmed. "Central Park is like a green lung in the middle of the city." When the car stopped in a parking lot near one of the main entrances, Henry felt a flutter in his stomach. It was the first time in a long time that he had ventured into such a large and busy public space. In the past, such outings were rare and always carefully controlled, with Helen overseeing every movement, ensuring Henry remained in his wheelchair to avoid any risk. Today, however, things would be different. Henry was determined to use his crutches, to feel the park under his own feet, or foot and prosthesis to be more precise. When Mr. Joseph began to unload the wheelchair, Henry intervened. "I don't think I'll need the chair right now," he said, picking up his crutches. "I want to try with these first." Helen seemed momentarily alarmed. "Are you sure, dear? The park is big, you might get tired." "Then I'll rest," Henry replied with newfound confidence, "or use the chair later." "But I want to try, Mother, please." Before Helen could protest further, Augustus placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Let him try, Helen. Dr. Paul said he's ready for new challenges." With his father's approval, Henry positioned himself with the crutches and took his first steps in the park. The terrain was different from the perfectly level floor of the mansion. There were small irregularities, grass, occasionally a fallen branch, but Henry adapted quickly, remembering the techniques Dr. Paul had taught him. Rachel walked by his side, attentive but not overprotective. "You're doing very well," she commented with genuine pride. "It looks like you were born to use those crutches." "I'd prefer to have been born with 2 functional legs," Henry joked. "But since that wasn't the case, I guess I'm managing well with what I have." "That's the attitude," Rachel smiled. "Using what we have in the best possible way." They followed a gentle path that wound around part of the lake. The park was relatively quiet for a Sunday, perhaps due to the early hour. Some families were picnicking. Couples strolled hand in hand. Cyclists and runners passed at a steady pace. Some curious glances turned to Henry, noticing his prosthesis and crutches, but for the first time he didn't feel bothered by it. With Rachel by his side, chatting animatedly as if nothing was out of the ordinary, Henry managed to ignore the stares, focusing only on the experience of being outdoors, moving on his own. "Look at that popcorn vendor," Rachel pointed enthusiastically. "Can we buy some?" "Of course," Helen agreed, relieved to see the natural interaction between the youngsters. "Augustus, do you mind?" "Not at all," Augustus replied, taking out his wallet. "Go ahead." "I'll wait here on this bench." Rachel hesitated, looking from Henry to the popcorn vendor, who was a few meters away. The path there included a small grassy slope, something potentially challenging for Henry with his crutches. "Let's go," Henry decided, noticing her hesitation. "I can do this. Are you sure?" Helen asked, worried. "That slope looks slippery." "I am," Henry affirmed. "I'll go slowly, don't worry." With Rachel walking patiently by his side, Henry began the descent, carefully calculating each step. Helen watched nervously from a distance, ready to run at the slightest sign of imbalance. Augustus, for his part, remained seemingly calm, though his eyes never left his son. When they reached the popcorn vendor, Henry couldn't help but let out a triumphant smile. He had conquered his first challenging terrain outside the house, without help beyond Rachel's moral support. 2 popcorns. Please, he asked the vendor, an elderly man with a friendly smile. Coming right up. Young man, the man replied, preparing the bags. First time in the park? First time using crutches in the park, Henry corrected, feeling an unprecedented pride in his condition. I'm doing well, don't you think? Like a veteran, the vendor confirmed, handing over the popcorn. Many adults with 2 legs don't walk as well as you, young man. When they returned to their parents, Helen couldn't hide her relief and pride. You 2 did great, she exclaimed. Henry, I'm impressed with your balance. Thanks, Mother, Henry smiled, offering her some of his popcorn. It wasn't as hard as it looked. You just needed a chance to try, Augustus observed, in a rare moment of emotional insight. Perhaps we've been overly cautious in the past. Augustus's admission caught everyone by surprise. Henry looked at his father, seeing him in a new light. Perhaps Rachel was right. Things were changing slowly but significantly. The rest of the morning passed in a climate of discovery and joy. They visited the lake, where they fed ducks with leftover popcorn, despite Helen's warnings not to feed wild animals. They walked through the gardens, admiring the lush vegetation. Augustus even suggested a visit to the Afro-Brazil Museum, which had a special exhibition of contemporary art. For Henry, every step was a small victory. He alternated between periods using crutches and brief rests in the wheelchair, which Mr. Joseph discreetly brought when needed. Rachel remained constantly by his side, not as a caregiver but as a friend, sharing discoveries, making jokes, making the whole experience lighter and more natural. Do you want to see the bicycles? Helen suggested, pointing to a nearby bike rental. Not to ride, she quickly added, noticing Henry's gaze, but they have some interesting models, including adapted tricycles. Really? Henry asked, suddenly interested. Tricycles I could use? Maybe, Helen replied cautiously. We can ask, at least. At the bike rental, an employee showed them several options. There were, in fact, tricycles adapted for people with reduced mobility, including models that could be pedaled with just one leg. Can I try it? Henry asked, his eyes shining with excitement. Helen looked at Augustus, expecting him to veto the idea as dangerous or reckless. To her surprise, Augustus nodded. Why not? The terrain here is flat and we can stay close by. With the help of the employee and Rachel, Henry was positioned on an adapted tricycle. His good foot on the pedal, the prosthesis resting on a special support. There were safety straps and a belt that ensured he wouldn't fall even if he lost his balance. Ready for a ride? Rachel asked, holding the handlebars to stabilize the vehicle. More than ready, Henry replied, with a smile that seemed to illuminate his entire face. With Rachel walking alongside, ready to help if necessary, Henry began to pedal slowly. The movement was different from anything he had ever experienced. There was a freedom, a sense of self-propulsion that not even crutches provided. He was moving on his own, using his own strength, controlling his own direction. Helen watched with tears in her eyes, a hand covering her mouth to contain her emotion. Augustus, beside her, had an expression that mixed pride and a kind of regret, as if only now realizing how much potential his son had, and how much time they had lost being overly protective. As Henry circled the small circuit for beginners, his smile grew, as did his confidence. Rachel, who initially walked alongside, soon realized he no longer needed constant supervision and simply watched him, enthusiastically applauding each completed lap. "I'm riding a bike!" Henry shouted, exultant. "Rachel, I'm riding a bike." "I see," she replied, laughing with joy. "You're amazing, Henry." At that moment, something transformative happened inside Henry. The feeling of accomplishment, of overcoming limits he had always believed to be insurmountable, opened his eyes to a world of possibilities he had never considered before. If he could ride a tricycle today, what else could he do tomorrow? What else had been denied to him, not by his physical disability, but by fear, his own and his parents'? When he finally stopped, exhausted but radiant, Helen rushed to hug him. "I'm so proud of you, my love," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thanks, Mother," Henry replied, returning the hug. Then, looking over her shoulder, he saw Rachel watching them with a serene smile. It was Rachel who gave me courage, he added honestly. She always believed I could do more. Helen turned to look at the girl, who now seemed suddenly shy at the recognition. Thank you, Rachel, Helen said sincerely, for seeing in my son what we at times forgot to see. I just see Henry as he really is, Rachel replied simply. Someone amazing who can do anything he wants in his own way. Augustus, who had been silently observing the scene until then, approached. I think we all have a lot to learn from you, Rachel, he said, with an unusual softness in his normally authoritative voice. Thank you for teaching us to see Henry with new eyes. It was the first time Augustus had directly thanked Rachel, acknowledging her positive contribution to the family. The moment did not go unnoticed by any of them. It was as if an invisible barrier had finally been broken down. What do you say we have lunch around here? Augustus suggested, looking around. There's a restaurant near the lake that looks good. That would be wonderful, Helen agreed, surprised and delighted by her husband's spontaneous suggestion. Augustus rarely proposed meals in public places, always preferring the privacy and control of exclusive environments. As they walked toward the restaurant, Henry back on his crutches after the tricycle adventure, he felt a comforting warmth in his chest. For the first time in his life, he felt part of a true family. Not just a problem to be managed, a condition to be treated, but an integral, valued, and loved member. The outing to Central Park had been a turning point for the Vasconcelos family. In the weeks that followed, a new dynamic was established between them. Henry, inspired by his success with the adapted tricycle, became more determined in his physical therapy exercises. Now he used his crutches regularly around the house, resorting to the wheelchair only when he was truly tired or for longer distances. Helen, seeing her son flourish, began to loosen the reins of her overprotective instinct. She had even enrolled Henry in adapted swimming lessons at an exclusive New York City club. The water provided an environment where Henry could move more freely, and he quickly became a skilled swimmer. As for Augustus, the change was subtle but noticeable. He spent more time at home, arriving earlier from the office some weekdays to follow his son's progress. In a surprising gesture, he had hired a piano teacher for Henry and Rachel, fulfilling the wish they had both expressed months ago. Rachel, in turn, adapted to her new life with a mixture of gratitude and caution. She loved school, absorbed knowledge like a sponge, and had made some friends. However, there was always a shadow of insecurity in her eyes, as if she feared that everything could disappear at any moment. That Thursday afternoon, Rachel was walking home from school alone. Henry had stayed for an extra science activity, and the driver would pick him up later. As she walked through the elegant neighborhood toward the Vasconcelos mansion, Rachel reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few months, from the streets of New York City to one of the city's most luxurious mansions, from abandonment to a family that gradually began to treat her as one of their own. "You're the girl from the Vasconcelos house, aren't you?" The voice interrupted her thoughts. Rachel turned and saw an elegant middle-aged woman observing her with curiosity. It took a few seconds to recognize her. It was Camilla, Henry's aunt, who had so vehemently opposed her presence in the mansion. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Rachel greeted politely as Helen had taught her. "Coming home from school, I imagine," Camilla commented, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The same school Henry will attend next year, isn't it?" "Yes, ma'am," Rachel confirmed, feeling uncomfortable under Camilla's scrutinizing gaze. "Interesting," Camilla murmured, adjusting the strap of her designer bag. "You know, I've been wondering how a street girl managed not only to get into the Vasconcelos house, but to stay there for so long. You must have some special talent." The insinuating tone made Rachel blush, not from shame, but from contained anger. "If you're suggesting I did something wrong to be there, you're mistaken. Henry is my friend, and his parents have been very generous to me." "Henry's friend," Camilla repeated with a sardonic smile. "Of course. And that friendship has nothing to do with the family's fortune, I suppose." "No, ma'am," Rachel replied, maintaining her composure despite the provocation. "I don't care about their money. I care about Henry." "How touching," Camilla sneered. "A story worthy of a soap opera. The poor girl and the rich disabled boy united against the world. But you know what happens at the end of those stories, dear? Reality always asserts itself. People like you and people like us don't belong in the same world." Rachel felt a lump in her throat, but she raised her chin, refusing to show weakness. "With all due respect, ma'am, I think I've heard enough. I have homework to do." She started to walk away, but Camilla stopped her with one last remark. "You know what I found out, Rachel? That you're not exactly who you say you are." These words made Rachel freeze. She turned slowly, facing Camilla's triumphant smile. "What do you mean?" "That perhaps your story about the orphanage isn't entirely true. Perhaps there are details you conveniently forgot to mention. Details that I'm sure Augustus and Helen would be very interested to know." Rachel's heart pounded. There were things about her past that she hadn't shared, not out of dishonesty, but because they were too painful, too complicated to explain. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her voice trembling. "I know more than you imagine," Camilla retorted. "I hired a private investigator. He discovered very interesting things about you and your family. Or should I say what's left of it?" Rachel felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "Please don't do this," she whispered, all her composure crumbling. "Don't destroy the only good thing that has ever happened to me." Camilla studied the girl's face for a long moment, savoring her power. "It's not up to me to destroy anything, dear. It's up to you. If you leave on your own quietly, I won't need to share my discoveries with my brother-in-law. Otherwise—" She let the threat hang in the air, incomplete but unequivocal. With that, Camilla turned and walked toward her imported car parked nearby, leaving Rachel motionless on the sidewalk, with unshed tears glistening in her eyes. When she finally arrived at the mansion, Rachel was emotionally and physically exhausted. She entered silently, hoping to go straight to her room unnoticed. But Helen was in the main living room arranging some flowers in a vase. "Rachel, dear, how was school today?" she asked with a warm smile that made Rachel feel even worse about Camilla's threats. "It was normal," she replied, forcing a smile. "I'm just a little tired. I'm going to my room if you don't mind." Helen frowned, noticing something wrong in the girl's posture and voice. "Is everything all right, Rachel? You seem down." "I'm fine, I just need to rest a bit," Rachel insisted, avoiding Helen's perceptive gaze. "Did you meet anyone on the way home?" Helen asked with an intuition that surprised Rachel. "Why do you ask?" Rachel replied defensively. "Because Camilla called a few minutes ago, saying she saw you coming home from school and that you had an interesting conversation," Helen explained, with a tone that revealed her distrust of her sister-in-law. "She didn't go into detail, but knowing Camilla, I imagined it might have been unpleasant for you." Rachel hesitated, torn between the desire to confide in Helen, who had become an almost maternal figure to her, and the fear of what Camilla might reveal. "It was nothing," she finally lied. "She just greeted me, asked about school." Helen clearly didn't believe her, but chose not to press. "Well, if there's anything you want to tell me, I'm here to listen, Rachel. You know that, don't you?" "Yes, ma'am," Rachel murmured with a lump in her throat. "Thank you." The next day, during breakfast, the atmosphere in the Vasconcelos mansion was one of lively anticipation. It was Friday, and Augustus had announced a surprise for the weekend. "I've prepared something special for us," he said, as he sipped his coffee. "We're going to spend the weekend at our country estate in the Hamptons. The mountain air will do everyone good, especially you, Henry, who has been so dedicated to your exercises." Henry almost choked on his juice. "The estate? Really, Father? We haven't been there in years." "Exactly," Augustus smiled. "It's more than time we revisited that place. I had some adaptations made recently to make it more accessible for you. And there's a special surprise waiting for us there." "What surprise?" Henry asked enthusiastically. "If I tell you it won't be a surprise anymore," Augustus laughed. "You'll have to wait and see. We'll leave right after lunch, so get what you need to take ready." Helen watched the scene with a happy smile. It was wonderful to see her husband so involved with the family again, proposing outings, planning surprises. It was as if the man she had married, the one who existed before the constant worries about business and their son's condition, was re-emerging. "Rachel will come with us, of course," Helen added, more as an affirmation than a question. "Naturally," Augustus confirmed to Henry's relief. "She's part of the family now." These words, spoken so casually, hit Rachel like a punch to the stomach. Part of the family. It was all she had ever wanted, and now, when it finally seemed within her grasp, Camilla threatened to take it away from her. "Thank you, sir," she murmured, fighting back tears. "It's very kind of you to include me." "It's not kindness, Rachel," Augustus replied with unusual seriousness. It's recognition. You have been significant to this family, especially to Henry. The rest of breakfast passed with Henry bombarding his father with questions about the estate, trying to find out what the surprise would be. Rachel participated minimally in the conversation, her mind occupied with the dilemma she faced. Should she tell the truth about her past before Camilla did? Or should she enjoy these last moments of happiness with the Vasconcelos family, knowing they might be the last? After breakfast, while Helen and Augustus took care of the travel preparations, Henry and Rachel went to the garden. It was a sunny day, and Henry practiced walking with a new prosthesis his father had specially ordered for him, lighter and more comfortable than the previous one. "You're very quiet today," Henry observed, studying his friend's worried face. Did something happen? Rachel hesitated. Henry had become her confidant, the person she trusted most in the world, but how could she explain something to him that she herself barely understood? How could she tell the truth about her past without risking losing the only true friendship she had ever had? "I'm fine," she lied, forcing a smile. "Just a little nervous about the trip. I've never been to a country estate before." "You'll love it," Henry assured her, accepting the superficial explanation. "My father's estate is amazing. It has a waterfall, forest trails, horses. Well, at least it had horses the last time we were there. It's been so long I don't even know anymore." "Why did you stop going?" Rachel asked, genuinely curious. Henry shrugged. "After my prosthesis accident, my parents became more cautious. They thought it was risky to take me to places without nearby medical infrastructure. And then my father got increasingly busy with work, my mother with her social events. The estate ended up being forgotten." "What prosthesis accident?" Rachel asked. It was the first time Henry had mentioned any accident. "Oh, it was nothing major," Henry replied, but his distant gaze suggested otherwise. "I was about 7, learning to use my first full-size prosthesis. We decided to spend a weekend at the estate to celebrate my progress. On the second day, I insisted on trying one of the harder trails, even with my parents saying it was too early, that I wasn't ready. Of course, they were right. I fell, hurt my arm and my leg stump, and had to be rushed to the nearest hospital." "I'm sorry," Rachel said, imagining little Henry, determined but vulnerable, facing his first major physical disappointment. "Don't be," Henry smiled without bitterness. "It was an important lesson. I learned that I need to respect my limits, at least until I'm ready to overcome them, and now I am, thanks to you, in large part." "I didn't do anything special," Rachel protested. "You did everything," Henry insisted. "Before you came, I had resigned myself to my condition. I accepted the limitations my parents and doctors imposed without questioning. You taught me to question, to challenge, to believe that I can do more." Henry's words, so sincere and full of admiration, made Rachel feel even worse about Camilla's threats. How could she leave and abandon Henry after everything they had shared? But how could she stay, knowing that her past could come to light at any moment, potentially hurting not only her, but also the family that had welcomed her? "Henry, I need to tell you something," she began, gathering courage. But before she could continue, they were interrupted by Mrs. Martha's arrival. "Children, Mrs. Helen is calling," the housekeeper announced. "It's time to pack for the trip." "We're coming, Mrs. Martha," Henry replied, standing up with the help of his prosthesis. He was becoming increasingly agile with it. "Come on, Rachel, we can talk later." Rachel nodded, swallowing the words she had been about to say. Perhaps it was better this way, she thought. Perhaps she could enjoy this last weekend with the Vasconcelos family before everything fell apart. A last moment of happiness before the truth came out. The trip to the Hamptons was smooth. Henry and Rachel sat in the back seat of the adapted minivan, while Augustus drove and Helen occupied the passenger seat. The vehicle was loaded with luggage, equipment, and supplies for the weekend. The road winding through the Catskill Mountains offered breathtaking views that left Rachel amazed. "Look, Rachel," Henry exclaimed, pointing to a valley that stretched below them. "Isn't it incredible?" "It's beautiful," Rachel agreed, taking in the landscape. Born and raised in the concrete of New York City, the exuberance of nature was something she had rarely experienced. Wait until you see the estate, Helen promised, turning to look at the youngsters. It's one of the most magical places I know. When they finally arrived at their destination, after almost 2 hours of travel, Rachel understood why Helen had used the word magical. The Vasconcelos estate was not an ordinary rural property. It was a small paradise hidden among the mountains. A spacious main house, built in a rustic but sophisticated style, surrounded by meticulously cared-for gardens and a vastness of preserved native forest. I had some renovations done recently, Augustus explained as he parked in front of the house. Access ramps, adapted bathrooms, wider trails to accommodate a wheelchair if necessary. I want it to be a place where we can all feel comfortable. Henry looked around with a mixture of nostalgia and discovery, as if rediscovering a beloved place from childhood, but seeing it with new eyes. It seems smaller than I remembered, he commented with a smile. That's because you grew up, Augustus replied with a touch of melancholy. You've grown a lot, son. As they unloaded the minivan, a middle-aged couple approached to greet them. Rachel immediately knew they were the caretakers by their simple clothes and respectful demeanor. Mr. Augustus, Mrs. Helen, so good to see you again, the man greeted with a warm smile. And this can't be Henry. How big you've gotten, young man. Hello, Mr. Jair, Mrs. Sider, Augustus replied, shaking the caretaker's hand. It's good to be back. I see you've taken good care of the place. We did our best, said Mrs. Sider, an elderly woman with grey hair and a kind face. And this lovely girl, who is she? This is Rachel, Helen introduced. She's living with us now. Welcome, dear, Mrs. Sider smiled, hugging Rachel with a spontaneity that caught her by surprise. Any friend of the Vasconcelos family is our friend too. While Mr. Jair helped Augustus with the luggage, Mrs. Sider led the rest of the group inside the house. The interior was spacious and welcoming, with rustic but comfortable furniture, a stone fireplace in the center of the main living room, and large windows that framed spectacular mountain views. I prepared the rooms as you asked, sir, Mrs. Sider told Augustus, and the surprise is all set as we agreed. Excellent, Augustus smiled with an enigmatic look at Henry. I think we should all rest a bit from the trip, and then I can show you the surprise before dinner. The sunset painted the sky of the Hamptons with orange and pink hues when Augustus finally announced it was time for the surprise. Henry could barely contain his excitement, while Rachel remained quiet, torn between curiosity about the surprise and anguish about her uncertain future. Come on, all of you, Augustus said, with a rare enthusiasm in his normally serious voice. Follow me. He guided them along a side path that led from the main house. Henry was using his crutches, refusing the wheelchair Mr. Jair had offered. Rachel walked by his side, attentive but not overprotective, allowing him to navigate the uneven terrain on his own. Helen followed close behind, visibly tense but resisting the urge to intervene. The trail, Rachel noticed, had been recently widened and leveled, making it much more accessible than it probably was before. Small solar lights marked the path, creating an almost magical effect against the twilight. After about 5 minutes of walking, they reached a clearing. In its center, illuminated by the last rays of the sun, was a structure that made Henry stop abruptly, jaw dropped. It was a music studio, not an improvised or rudimentary construction, but a professional space, with glass walls that offered a panoramic view of the surrounding nature. Through the windows, one could see musical instruments of all kinds, including a majestic grand piano positioned so that whoever played it could contemplate the valley below. Father, Henry murmured, speechless. I know you and Rachel have been practicing a lot on the piano at the mansion, Augustus explained. I thought you'd like a proper space to develop that talent. Here at the estate you can play as much as you want, without worrying about neighbors or schedules. It's incredible, Henry finally managed to say, his eyes shining with emotion. There's more, Augustus continued, opening the studio door. Come see. The interior was even more impressive than it looked from the outside. Besides the piano, there were guitars, a cello, a drum kit, and various other instruments. A state-of-the-art sound system occupied one of the walls, along with sheet music stands and music books. The floor was made of noble wood, specially treated for perfect acoustics. I hired an architect specializing in acoustics, Augustus explained, as everyone absorbed the atmosphere. The sound here is perfect, according to him, and the walls are soundproof, so you can practice even at night without disturbing anyone. In the main house. Thank you, Father, Henry said, his voice choked. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Augustus smiled, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. Just use it. Music has been an important discovery for you, and I want to support that. I want to support everything that makes you happy, Henry. Helen approached, equally moved. Augustus, this is wonderful. You never cease to surprise me. I've been trying to make up for years of distance, Augustus admitted, with unusual humility. I realized I spent too much time focused on what Henry couldn't do, instead of discovering and celebrating what he can do. And he can do a lot, as Rachel has shown us. Rachel, who had been silently observing the scene until then, felt all eyes turn to her. I didn't do anything special, she murmured, embarrassed by the attention. You did everything, Helen contradicted gently. You brought a new perspective to our family, one we desperately needed. You taught us to see Henry as he truly is, not a disabled boy, but a talented, intelligent, and capable young man who just needs the right opportunities to shine. Helen's words, so sincere and full of gratitude, were too much for Rachel. All the emotions she had been repressing since her encounter with Camilla, fear, guilt, anxiety, overflowed at once. Before she could stop herself, tears began to stream down her face. Rachel, what's wrong? Henry asked, alarmed, approaching his friend. I'm so sorry, Rachel sobbed, unable to hold back her tears. You've been so good to me, and I don't deserve it. What are you talking about? Helen questioned, concerned. Of course you do, dear. No, you don't understand, Rachel insisted, wiping her tears with the back of her hands. There are things about me that you don't know. Things I should have told you from the beginning. A tense silence fell over the studio. Augustus and Helen exchanged worried glances, while Henry watched his friend with a mixture of confusion and support. What things, Rachel? Augustus asked finally, his tone carefully neutral. Rachel took a deep breath, trying to calm herself enough to speak. This was the moment she had been dreading, but she also knew it was inevitable. Better they heard it from her than from Camilla. I didn't run away from the orphanage because I was unhappy there, she began, her voice trembling. I ran away because I discovered something about myself, about my family. Everyone waited in silence as Rachel gathered the courage to continue. My full name is Rachel Silva Mendonça, she revealed. My mother's name was Louisa Silva. She worked for a wealthy family as a housekeeper. Her employer, he promised to help her, to give us both a better life. But when she got pregnant, he denied the child was his and fired her. My mother never fully recovered from that blow. She raised me alone, working several jobs, but always with difficulty. When I was 6, she became very ill. Cancer. She fought for almost 2 years, but in the end, Rachel stopped, swallowing hard, unable to say the word. After that, I went to the orphanage. I stayed there for 3 years, until I accidentally found my mother's diary hidden among the few things that had been kept for me. In that diary, she revealed my father's name, Richard Mendonça. Helen brought a hand to her mouth while Augustus frowned, clearly trying to process the information. Henry looked from Rachel to his parents, confused. Richard Mendonça, your rival construction company's partner, Rachel continued. When I found out, I started investigating. I got a photo of him in a magazine and, well, they say we look alike. Your eyes, Helen murmured, as if suddenly realizing something that had been in front of her all along. They have the same shape as his. How did I not notice before? When I found out who my father was, I tried to contact him, Rachel went on. I went to the construction company building, tried to speak with him. The security guards kicked me out, of course. A ragged girl trying to see the CEO? They had no reason to believe me. After that, I became obsessed. I started following him, trying to find a moment to talk to him personally. That's how I ended up meeting you. Your mansion is on the way between his house and his company. So you knew who we were from the beginning? Augustus asked, with an evident tension in his voice. Yes and no, Rachel replied honestly. I knew you were neighbors of Richard's. I knew you owned a competing construction company. But I swear I didn't plan to enter your lives. That night, during the storm, I really was just looking for shelter. When I saw the mansion, I thought maybe I could ask to stay in the garage or the service area until the rain passed. I never imagined I would end up being welcomed by the family. And why didn't you tell us this before? Helen asked with more curiosity than accusation. At first I was scared, Rachel admitted. You might kick me out if you knew I was the daughter of your competitor. Then when I started to feel like part of the family, I became even more scared. Scared of losing all this, the first time in my life I truly felt accepted, valued. But why are you telling us now? Augustus questioned. Rachel hesitated, reluctant to mention Camilla, to seem like she was trying to cause friction in the family. I think I've hidden it for too long, she finally said. You deserve to know the truth. Henry, who had been listening in silence until then, approached Rachel. None of that matters to me, he declared firmly. I don't care who your biological father is, or why you were in the park that night. What matters is who you are, Rachel. And you are my best friend, the person who taught me to believe in myself, who made me want to be more than just a boy in a wheelchair. Rachel looked at Henry, fresh tears glistening in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. You're my best friend too, Henry, the only one I've ever had. Augustus and Helen exchanged long glances, communicating silently in the way that only couples who have spent years together can. Finally, Augustus cleared his throat. Rachel, we thank you for your honesty, he said with a formality that made Rachel's heart sink. It's a complex situation that we need to process, but I want you to know that nothing you've said changes the fact that you have been a positive presence in Henry's life, and by extension, in ours. Does that mean that I can stay? Rachel asked hesitantly. Of course you can stay, Helen replied before Augustus could speak. This is your home now, Rachel. It doesn't matter who your biological father is. Helen, Augustus intervened with a warning tone, we need to discuss this more deeply. There's nothing to discuss, Helen retorted with surprising firmness. Look at them, Augustus. Look at what Rachel has done for Henry. How could we send her away now? Henry watched the exchange between his parents with growing anxiety. Father, please, he pleaded. Don't send Rachel away. She's like the sister I never had. Augustus looked at his son, noticing the intensity in his eyes, the determination in his posture. This was no longer the resigned boy of a few months ago, but a young man who knew what he wanted and was willing to fight for it. And all thanks to Rachel's influence. I won't send her away, Augustus finally assured, but I think we need to have a conversation with Richard Mendonza. If he is truly your biological father, Rachel, he has the right to know about you, to be a part of your life if he wishes. He already made it clear he doesn't want me, Rachel replied bitterly. He rejected my mother when she needed him most. Why would it be different now? Because people change, Augustus said with surprising wisdom. I changed. 6 months ago, I would have reacted very differently to this revelation, but I've learned some important lessons recently, especially about what really matters in life. And it's not business or competitors or old rivalries, it's family. Human connection, love. Henry looked at his father with renewed admiration. This was not the Augustus Vasconcelos he knew, the ruthless businessman, the distant and critical father. This was a man who had learned, evolved, found a new perspective on life. What if he doesn't want to meet me? Rachel asked, still fearful. What if he rejects me again? Then that will be his problem, not yours, Augustus replied firmly. And you will continue to have a home with us for as long as you wish. That promise, made with such conviction, dissolved the last trace of fear in Rachel's heart. For the first time since Camilla had threatened her, she felt she could truly belong, for that her place in the Vasconcelos family was not as fragile as she feared. Thank you, she said with deep sincerity. Now, Augustus said, breaking the emotional tension of the moment, I think this studio deserves a proper inauguration. How about a little demonstration of what you two have learned? Henry smiled, relieved by the change of subject. We're still beginners, Father. Enthusiastic beginners, Rachel corrected, regaining some of her usual spirit. Which means we play with a lot of feeling, even if we don't always hit all the notes. The four laughed, and the heavy atmosphere that had dominated the studio began to dissipate. Henry and Rachel sat together on the piano bench, while Augustus and Helen settled into nearby armchairs. The sun had completely set now, and the full moon cast its silvery light through the glass windows, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere. The two young people began to play a simple version of The Girl from Ipanema, the song they had practiced most, assiduously in recent weeks. Their hands moved over the keys with growing confidence, occasionally missing a note or losing the rhythm, but always finding their way back to the melody. It was imperfect, yes, but also genuinely moving, a metaphor for the journey they had all taken in recent months. As they played, Rachel thought of everything that had happened since that rainy night, when she sought shelter in the Vasconcelos mansion. She thought of the loneliness she felt after her mother's passing, the despair that led her to the streets, the obsession to find the father she had never known. And then she thought of the unexpected friendship with Henry, Helen's growing affection, Augustus's reluctant but genuine acceptance. Her life had been transformed in ways she could never imagine. And now, even with the truth revealed, even with the uncertainty of how Richard Mendonça would react when he learned of her existence, Rachel felt safe. Because she had found something much more valuable than the acceptance of an absent father. She had found a true family. People who loved her for who she was, not for the blood that ran in her veins. Beside her, Henry also reflected on his own journey. He remembered how he felt before Rachel's arrival. Resigned, limited, defined by his disability. Now he saw himself completely differently. His missing leg was still a part of him, but it wasn't all he was. He was also a beginner pianist, a promising swimmer, a young man who could tackle mountain trails on a country estate with his own crutches. He was someone with dreams, aspirations, and the courage to pursue them. The music ended, and for a moment silence reigned in the studio. Then Helen began to applaud, followed by Augustus. "Bravo!" Helen exclaimed with tears in her eyes. "You are wonderful." "It was beautiful," Augustus agreed. "Truly beautiful." Henry and Rachel exchanged knowing smiles. It wasn't just for the compliment on the music. They both knew there was something deeper being recognized there. The harmony they had created, not just on the piano but in their lives, in the lives of the Vasconcelos family. The next morning, during breakfast, served on the porch overlooking the valley, Augustus made a surprising announcement. "I spoke with Richard Mendonça last night," he revealed calmly. Everyone at the table froze. Rachel felt her heart race. "How? What do you mean?" she managed to ask. "I called him after you went to sleep," Augustus explained. "I thought it best not to wait. I told him we needed to talk about an important matter, on neutral ground. He agreed to meet us this afternoon at the country club restaurant half an hour from here." "Did you tell him about me?" Rachel asked, her voice weak. "No," Augustus replied. "I thought that revelation deserved to be made in person, and that you should be present when it happened." Rachel could barely process what she was hearing. In a few hours, she would be face to face with the man she had sought for so long, the father she had never known, who had never acknowledged her. What if he denies it again? She asked, vocalizing her biggest fear. What if he says I'm not his daughter? "Then we deal with it," Augustus replied firmly. "Together as a family." "Exactly," Helen agreed, squeezing Rachel's hand across the table. "No matter what happens today, you have us." Henry watched the scene with a mixture of anxiety and determination. "I'm coming with you," he declared. "I want to be there." "All of us will go," Augustus assured. "We are a family now, and families face challenges together." The hours leading up to the meeting passed in a blur of nervousness and preparation. Helen helped Rachel choose an appropriate outfit, a simple but elegant dress they had bought together at a New York City mall. Henry practiced a supportive speech he planned to give if Richard Mendonça rejected Rachel. Augustus remained calm and focused, as he always did before important negotiations, but there was a tension in his shoulders that revealed his concern. When they finally arrived at the country club, an exclusive establishment frequented by New York City's elite, Rachel felt completely out of place, despite her new clothes and the careful hairstyle Helen had given her. This was a world she had never belonged to, a world of privilege and connections, so distant from the streets where she had survived for months. Richard Mendonça was already waiting for them at a reserved table on the restaurant terrace, overlooking an impeccably maintained golf course. He was a tall man, athletic despite being in his early 50s, with graying hair at his temples and a face that Rachel noticed with a start, had undeniably similar features to her own. "Augustus," Richard greeted, standing up as the group approached. His gaze quickly passed over Helen and Henry, stopping confused on Rachel. I didn't realize it would be a family lunch. In fact, Richard, that's exactly what this is about, Augustus replied, with a seriousness that made the other man frown. Family. When everyone was seated, Augustus made the formal introductions. Richard greeted Helen and Henry with professional courtesy, still clearly confused about the presence of an unknown teenager at what he expected to be a business meeting. And this is Rachel, Augustus concluded. Rachel Silva Mendonça. The use of the surname Mendonça did not go unnoticed by Richard, who immediately tensed. What is this, Augustus? Some kind of trick? It's no trick at all, Augustus replied calmly. Rachel is Louisa Silva's daughter. I believe you knew her about 13 years ago, when she worked for the Montgomery family, friends of yours. Richard visibly paled, his gaze returning to Rachel with new intensity. This is ridiculous, he said, but his voice betrayed uncertainty. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, Helen interjected with gentle firmness. Look at her, Richard. Really look. She has your eyes, your chin. Even the shape of her eyebrows is the same as yours. Richard studied Rachel for a long moment, and she met his gaze, despite her heart pounding wildly in her chest. It was the moment she had imagined, feared, and desired for so long, the moment of truth. My mother never asked anything from you, Rachel said finally, breaking the silence. Not even when she got sick. She raised me alone, worked 3 jobs to give me the basics. She never spoke ill of you, you know. She always said that one day you would understand what you lost. Tears began to form in Richard's eyes, to the surprise of everyone at the table. Louisa, he murmured almost to himself. Is she well? She passed away 4 years ago, Rachel replied softly. Cancer. Richard closed his eyes for a moment as if absorbing a physical blow. When he opened them again, there was a new vulnerability in his gaze. I didn't know, he said finally. I swear I didn't know about her illness or about you. How could you not know? Henry questioned, unable to contain his indignation. My mother said you rejected Louisa when she got pregnant. It wasn't quite like that, Richard replied, running a hand over his face. Louisa and we had a relationship, yes. When she told me she was pregnant, I asked for time to think. I was about to marry someone else, a union my family had practically arranged. I told Louisa I needed a few weeks to sort out my situation. But you never came back, Rachel accused. When I returned, she had already left, Richard revealed. The family she worked for said she had resigned, leaving no contact address. I tried to find her, but back then, without the internet, without social media, it was much harder to locate someone who didn't want to be found. Did you really try to find her? Rachel asked, suspicious but with a glimmer of hope. For a few weeks, Richard admitted. Then, life went on. I got married, divorced a few years later. I built my career, my company. I convinced myself that maybe it was better that way, that maybe the baby wasn't even mine, that Louisa would be better off without me. Lies we tell ourselves to sleep at night. There was a raw honesty in Richard's words, an admission of flaws that surprised everyone. This was not the villain Rachel had imagined for so long, the cruel man who had deliberately abandoned her pregnant mother. He was just a man who had made misguided choices, who had allowed fear and convenience to dictate his actions, and who now faced the consequences. What happens now? Augustus asked after a moment of reflective silence. Richard looked directly at Rachel. That depends on you, he said, with a humility that didn't match his public image as a ruthless businessman. I would perfectly understand if you never wanted to see me again. I failed you and your mother in unforgivable ways. But if there's any chance to get to know you, to be a part of your life in some way, I would very much like that. Why? Rachel asked directly. Why now? Out of guilt? Out of obligation? Out of regret? Richard replied honestly. And perhaps if you give me the chance, out of love too. Because you are my daughter, and even though I've only just discovered this for sure, I already feel a bond I can't explain. Rachel pondered his words, trying to discern sincerity from manipulation. She looked at Henry, who nodded encouragingly, then at Helen and Augustus, who offered supportive smiles. Finally, she turned to Richard. I don't know if I can forgive you for what you did to my mother, she said frankly, but maybe we can start over. Get to know each other, see what happens. The relief on Richard's face was palpable. "It's more than I deserve," he said, his voice choked. "Thank you, Rachel. But I want you to know one thing," Rachel added firmly. "I already have a family now." She gestured to the Vasconcelos. "They took me in when I had nothing. They accepted me when no one else would. Any relationship between us will have to respect that." "I understand," Richard nodded, looking with new appreciation at Augustus, Helen, and Henry. "And I am eternally grateful to them for taking care of you when I couldn't, or rather, when I chose not to be present." "In fact," Augustus intervened, "perhaps we can consider this an opportunity for all of us. Our companies have been competitors for so long, often in unnecessary conflict. Perhaps through Rachel we can find a new path, collaboration instead of competition." "Are you suggesting a merger, Augustus?" Richard asked, surprised. "I'm suggesting possibilities," Augustus smiled. "The same ones that opened up for my family when a certain girl appeared at our door during a storm." Lunch continued in a surprisingly cordial atmosphere, considering the extraordinary circumstances. Plans were discussed, stories shared, bridges began to be built between people who, until hours before, were strangers or almost adversaries. For Rachel, it was as if a circle was closing. Her search for her father, which had begun so desperately and solitarily, now culminated in this moment of new beginnings. There were no guarantees that her relationship with Richard would flourish, nor that the wounds of the past would fully heal. But there was hope, possibility, and that, she had learned, was often enough to start. On the way back to the estate, as the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky with the same orange hues as the night before, Henry held Rachel's hand in the back seat of the minivan. "Are you okay?" he asked, concerned by his friend's silence. Rachel smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her eyes. "I am," she replied sincerely. "Better than I've been in a long time." "It's a lot to process," Henry observed. "Finding your father, after so long, discovering that maybe he's not the villain you thought he was. Life is rarely as simple as we'd like," Rachel philosophized. "People aren't completely good or bad. They're complicated, imperfect, capable of both terrible mistakes and surprising kindness." "Like all of us," Henry agreed. "Like all of us," Rachel repeated, squeezing her friend's hand. "You know what I learned today? That family isn't just about blood or names, it's about who's there for you, who accepts you as you are, who loves you even knowing your flaws." "And you have a big family now," Henry smiled. "Us, Richard, maybe, even Camilla eventually, if she can get over her snobbery." Rachel laughed. "I wouldn't bet on that," she joked. "But who knows, if you taught me anything, Henry, it was that the limits we imagine for ourselves and for others are often illusory. They can be overcome with courage, determination, and a little help." When they arrived at the estate, the sky was already dotted with the first stars. Augustus suggested they light a bonfire in the garden, something they hadn't done in years. Soon everyone was sitting in a circle around the crackling flames, sharing stories, laughing, occasionally reflecting in silence on the day's extraordinary events. Watching the dancing flames, Rachel thought about how her life had transformed since that rainy night when she sought shelter in the Vasconcelos mansion. From a street girl, without hope or future, to someone with a family, a home, and even a biological father willing to get to know her. The journey had been long and often painful, but every step, every challenge had been worth it to reach this moment of belonging. Henry, sitting beside her, seemed lost in similar thoughts. His own journey, from resignation to self-confidence, from isolation to connection, had been equally transformative. Together, they had learned that true limitations are not physical, social, or economic, but those we impose on ourselves and others out of fear, prejudice, or lack of imagination. "You know what we should do?" Henry suggested suddenly. "We should turn the estate into a music center for children with disabilities. Use the studio my father built for something bigger, something that can help others like us." "That would be amazing," Rachel exclaimed, immediately captivated by the idea. "We could give lessons, organize performances, show everyone that art knows no physical limitations. And I could help fund it," Augustus added, who had overheard the conversation. Use company resources for something truly meaningful instead of just another commercial venture. Richard would probably contribute too, Helen suggested. It would be a joint project, a symbol of the new relationship between the families. The four continued to develop the idea, each suggestion more enthusiastic than the last. What began as a casual proposal quickly took shape as a concrete plan, a shared dream that could benefit not only them, but countless other children and young people facing similar challenges. As the night deepened and the bonfire slowly died down, Rachel looked around at the people who now formed her family, not just by blood or by law, but by choice, by love, by genuine connection. She felt a peace she had never experienced before, a sense of being exactly where she was meant to be. "Thank you," she whispered, so low that only Henry could hear. "For what?" he asked, curious. "For finding me that stormy night," Rachel replied with a smile, "for seeing me when I was invisible to the rest of the world." "Funny," Henry smiled. "I was about to say the exact same thing to you."